job interviews, career and life advice from just about everybody.
In this episode, we will be speaking with Kris Sharma, a very interesting guy with a lot of experience in a lot of seemingly unconnected fields. He has done stuff with software, with sales, with technology, also with like the entertainment world and writing and stand-up comedy. And he's been all over the place, done all kinds of things. He's got a lot of really important, interesting insights that I think will be really useful to many of our listeners.
Agreed. I don't know. I felt like I should say something, but yeah.
I thought you should say something.
Oh, man. Anyway, here are both of us saying lots of things to Kris.
You don't want to miss it. Did you know that approaching the math section of the SAT or the ACT like you would approach a test in your math class is likely to hurt your score on test day? SAT and ACT math questions tend to ask about relatively simple math ideas in unfamiliar ways, which means reading each question carefully and avoiding small mistakes is much more important on standardized tests than it is on classroom tests. To find out more, look for our SAT Prep Black Book 2nd edition and our ACT Prep Black Book 2nd edition on Amazon.com.
Yes, so here we are with Kris Sharma. Kris, can you please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Hey. Thanks for having me. Yeah, my name's Kris Sharma, obviously. And I went to college with Mike years ago at the University of Florida, and I am currently the founder of Webinar Grow. We are a B2B marketing consulting firm. So we do marketing for technology companies, mostly software. And I've had a lot of jobs over the years that I'm sure we'll dive into in this interview. And I also I'm a comedian and writer.
Cool. So I have to be honest with you, the comedian and writer part is the most interesting to me right off the bat.
Yeah, like pretty much.
The other stuff is very interesting too.
It all connects.
Yeah, I figured it might. So actually, that's one of the things I was kind of hoping we would talk about. My guess / like half understanding, more from sort of stalking you occasionally on LinkedIn. It's not that we've been like communicating frequently in the last few decades, but my general sense is that maybe kind of noticed like a skill set for presenting and speaking off the cuff and doing that kind of thing. And that kind of led to the webinaring. Is that sort of it or not exactly?
Kind of. Yeah. I mean, I always joke that like pretty much the only things I'm good at and do are writing and talking. Everything else,
there you go.
I can't hang a picture. Watching me with a PowerPoint is just embarrassing. It's like, what do you? So it's like, if their words are involved, I'm usually okay. It actually kind of dovetailed strangely. I feel like everything I've done, and we can always dive into more detail, but everything I've done has always led into the next thing. So with webinars specifically, I had taken a job in the tech industry doing sales, and no real rationale other than I had done some sales before and I needed a job. Right. That was like, okay, yeah, I can do that. And I was living in West LA at the time. And if you're familiar with LA traffic, being near where you work is extremely important. So we had moved there and I'm like, okay, I need to work somewhere that's not 2 hours away. So like, okay, there's a tech company there. Everyone's really cool. And they found out I did some writing. I started doing some copywriting. And then with the webinar specifically, we had reached a point where at that time, the sales team was doing all outbound sales. So like calling, emailing, there was no lead generation at all. And I literally lost my voice being on the phone. And I was like, I can't talk to people anymore. This is too much. So I just talked to the company.
Even though it was in that writing and talking wheelhouse, it was still
too much. Yeah,
there's a limit.
Too much of a good thing, right?
Even the greats have to pull back.
So yeah, at that time, I just talked with the company founders and I said, listen, let me try some webinars to generate leads. Let's just see if they work. And I threw some stuff together and the first one went extremely well. And that really kind of set the tone for the next few years there, generating leads with that. And we were, how long was this? Like 3 years ago now, planning on moving out of LA, like, okay, I want to start doing something else. And, so at that time, remote work wasn't quite the thing it is now. It's like, okay, I better start consulting and freelancing. So that's how I got into starting that business, was just the same thing I was doing at my job became the business.
Right.
Actually.
That's really cool.
So just to clarify, so this was prior to your current company, like you became the webinar guy at the company where you were working, then you moved for other reasons and then decided that you would kind of reestablish this webinar skill on your own. Is that accurate?
Pretty much, yeah. So at the company, it's called DYL in LA. They're still around. They're actually a customer of mine now.
Oh, cool.
So we're still technically working with them. Yeah, basically I became the webinar guy. I was doing a lot, just dove into demand generation and marketing. So like email marketing and ad copy and all that. So, after our second child was born, we're like, all right, we got to get out of LA. This is too much. Just, the traffic and all.
Okay.
So we decided, we decided to move to Boise, which is where we live now, which we love. So I obviously was like, okay, I need to make money. And I was like, how do I apply for a job in some other city I've never been? So I just started freelancing, and initially was doing anything that was related to the skill set. So I was doing a lot of email copywriting for tech companies, Facebook ad management, basically anything I had a reasonable skill at. I was like, okay, let me just try this. And then
how are you finding that work? Just out of
back initially, let's see, there was Upwork. It's like a freelancing website, which I still am technically on, although I use it more for hiring than necessarily working these days. And then sometimes even just through connecting with people on Facebook or LinkedIn, like, in some different groups on some of those, like, hey, I need help with this. Like, oh yeah, I can do it. Okay. Yeah. Okay. It truly, like, if I look at all the successes I've had in life, it's truly the silliest thing where it's me going, oh yeah, I think I could do that. Like, there's no big proposal. There's no no website. They're like, what's the name of your company? Oh, I should have a company.
Like, I should have one.
How do you pay me? I don't know. What do you think? Like, I have no idea. Right. So like, and I think that if there's a theme, I think for either the kids listening or even just later on in life, that's kind of the way to do it. I don't know if you're familiar with Dane Maxwell.
The name's familiar, but I can't think who that is.
He's a really cool guy. He's a big software company. He has a lot of businesses, but he has a book called Start from Zero. And it's kind of that approach where we tend to, especially in the business world, start with the wrong things, right? We want to have a website and business cards and a business plan and all this stuff. And it's like, you actually need a customer.
Don't if there's one thing you
anything
need,
else,
it's a customer. Yeah.
So even now, like I've been doing like a little informal coaching with comedians and people that want to start businesses. And I'm like, every time they show me the plan, I'm like, cut out everything and just go talk to someone that needs what you're selling. Like that's the one constant that will be the same throughout the rest of time, right? It's like, okay, just get a customer and then you figure it out. Because this kind of podcast was really interesting to me because I was thinking about like, well, what advice would I give even my own kids who are 3 and 5? And I really can't give specific advice because the world, who knows what's going to be the case, right? Yeah. Like webinars didn't even exist when I was in high school or college, right? Like that's not even a thing. So pushing out 10, 20 years, like no idea. I've worked with clients like, kind of Fortune 500 companies who sponsor gamers, the kids playing Twitch video games. I'm like, you watch people play video games? Like, what?
There's money in this?
And their contracts are like $1 million. I'm like looking at these contracts like, this is crazy.
Oh yeah.
So it's like, there's so many opportunities. But yeah, basically like, I think sticking with the principles that you can apply anywhere will be more fruitful than saying, yeah, you should definitely do this, right?
Yeah.
Definitely start an agency. It's like, what? Yeah. We're going to be ruled by computers in 20 years. What are you talking about? We're going to be in the Matrix.
Or find out that we've been in the Matrix the whole time.
We've been in the
so or the Matrix reveal. One of the
It's too funny.
Yeah, there's a point at every one of these interviews where the guest says like one sentence or two sentences. It just happened with you. And I realized, like, I've been writing down, all these questions I'm having, like, while you're whatever. And then there's like a critical moment of I write like more questions based on more sentences that you say. And I realize there's zero chance I'm going to get answers to all of these questions, like in the time that we have. Like, it's blossomed so much that there's no way to reel it all in. But with that in mind, I would like to go back and clarify maybe a couple of terms. One of the things that comes up a lot in these talks is that there's certain jargon or vocabulary, whatever you want to call it, that's,
germane to a certain industry.
Germain. I was going to say Germain, then I was like, no, that's too fancy. So
Don't worry, I'll say the
something else,
fancy
but then I
word that you're
couldn't-
afraid to say.
All right. So, yeah, you know, there's vocabulary that goes with, there we go, that goes with a particular field, germanely. And when you're outside of the field, it can seem daunting or maybe even just nonsensical to hear someone, you know, say certain things. And yeah, and so one of the things that we try to do is to help the listeners sort of, you know, learn those terms kind of as we go, especially because many of them will be relevant to whatever they might, or could very possibly be relevant to whatever they decide to do. When you mentioned earlier the difference between things like outbound sales, like phone-based, you know, selling versus lead generation via webinars and all those kinds of things, I would like to kind of explore briefly like what all those different things are, why they might matter to a company in different ways. And maybe we could start by defining what a webinar actually is. Like, where did that come from?
Yeah,
before they were webinars, what were they? Like, you know, what was the thing that the webinar grew out of and all that stuff?
Right. You know, it's funny. The first time I heard the word webinar, I was like, that is the stupidest.
Me too.
A webinar? Okay, bro.
Like, are we just going to make anything that goes on the internet now is web?
Yeah, exactly.
Webby, yeah, syllables
web talk. Basically, webinar is a web, you know, the World Wide Web, as they called the internet back in the day, a web seminar. So basically, instead of speaking to a group of people live, right? Like, hey, I'm renting a conference room at the Holiday Inn and giving a talk. It's all on the internet. And even before webinars, people were doing these teleseminars where they would call into a phone line, and you know, the people were doing that in like the 90s.
I was on one of those when I was an intern at a big company. I don't know if it was the worst internship program I've ever heard of, or if I was the worst intern in an OK program. I'm not sure which one. Like, looking back, but
some of that could have been me.
yeah, but I remember the one and only like teleseminar that I was privy.
It's basically a giant phone call,
everyone's
right?
like, yeah, and everyone's like gathered around, and people are like talking over speakerphones in like all these different locations. And I remember thinking, like, this can't be the best way to do this. Like, somebody's going to come up with something better. Anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt. Please go ahead.
Sorry, now we're on it, right? We got Zoom. Yeah, Zoom's everywhere now with the pandemic. Yeah, so that's a webinar. And so the context for our business is for these technology companies to generate leads, like people that are interested in buying their software, and then even to get them through the buying process. I guess to give an idea, like if you imagine selling, so we'll talk about the outbound sales, right? Outbound sales just basically means you're doing outreach. You're cold calling people, you're sending emails, you're hitting them up on LinkedIn. You're just doing whatever you can to connect with someone buying your product.
So instead of them showing up to talk to you, basically that would be inbound. Outbound means like you're initiating.
Going out. Exactly. Exactly.
You're bounding out to them.
Yeah.
And there's, you know, and I find, especially with business to business sales, 90% of businesses I deal with have to have some form of outbound.
Sure.
You know, in a perfect world, you could go, yeah, people just find me, you know, but you can get to that point, but you have to ramp up. It's a fool's errand to think like, oh, I can't get on the phone. Like you have to get on the phone, and it can be grueling. Like I started sales again, like everything in my life by accident. You know, I was, how old was I? 24, 25. I had been doing comedy and I was super broke. I'm like, I'm going to go to law school. I'm done. I'm finished. And my parents are like, well, you know, you need to get a job before law school starts. You can't just hang out at our house all day. Like, all right. So I got a job at a mortgage company doing like a loan officer, which basically sales, right? So it was literally like out of the movies where you have a stack of leads and a phone and you're just dialing for dollars all day.
Smile and dial. Yeah.
How did you get that job, incidentally? Like, was that just a...
It was a classified ad in the Tampa Tribune. Oh. It's actually an actual physical newspaper, believe it or not.
I don't know if the Tampa Tribune still exists.
Yeah, classified ads, probably not at all, right?
This is like a very, you know, it's like when we were kids and you'd watch a movie from like 1910 or whatever the earliest movies were, and you know, and some guy is like doing all these things that you like. What is that?
Operator, get me Pennsylvania 6500.
Right.
Who are you talking to? Yeah, Yeah. The equivalent now, I guess, would probably be like a Craigslist ad.
Sure, yeah. Craigslist is an online job listing or something. So you were looking for jobs in your area. That was what you found. You applied. Straightforward, I guess.
Yeah, I applied and met with the guy who I still talk to, actually, Kyle Jackson. And he was really cool. We were talking. He's like, yeah, I really like your background. And he was showing me, the income potential of doing sales. And that was my first time with sales going, oh, wait, I can make more money based on my work? Tell me more.
Yeah.
And so that I think was
I was just going to say, sorry, can you elaborate kind of on that? I assume you're talking about like a commission structure kind of a thing. Is that more or less what you're like? In other words, the more that you sold or the people, can you kind of describe how that works?
Yeah. So at that time, this was for loans. Can't remember what the exact commissions were, but basically when you would have someone close a loan, whether it's a refinance or a new purchase, you would get a percentage of the company's fees. So like, let's say if they charge $5,000 for whatever they did, you might get $1,000 or $2,000. And then that job was actually pure commission. So there was no base salary. It was just hunt and kill what you eat, or hunt what you find, gather in the thing.
Find
no idea.
No idea. Whatever. Yeah, I don't know.
I've heard eat what you kill.
Eat what you kill. That sounds.
Yeah, we'll go with that.
Eat something.
Eat what you get at the
something.
grocery store. Order on DoorDash. But yeah, so that was. I mean, it was funny. I think at that time I had never encountered that. Because I was coming from the entertainment world where it's like, look, I'm doing shows for free and I'm just working any random job I can, waiting tables or doing data entry. So this idea of like, oh, I can just write my own ticket and make more money was shocking to me. So I dove into that and did mortgages. And then I kind of saw the writing on the wall. This was during that mortgage boom of the mid 2000s.
I was just going to ask when that was. Yeah.
And I remember talking to the owners and I was like, I don't think this is going to work out. Like, this doesn't sound.
Something about this is going to fall apart.
Little sketch, right? And it's so funny because like being in it was so funny because people are like, oh, the mortgage brokers were shady or buyers were shady. It's like, no, the banks were shady because the bankers would come in and they'd say, yeah, so you can write a loan. You don't need any documentation. If they tell you what their income is. I was like, so they just have to tell me that they make 10 grand a month and that's what I write down. Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah.
Why would they lie? You called them up on the phone.
Exactly. Yeah. You can't lie on
what do you
phone.
Think, Wall Street? Like, you think these Wall Street companies weren't in on it? Like, of course they're not dumb.
I had a friend actually with a similar job describe the exact same thing. Somebody on the phone says, I make, 250 grand a year, you say, and then they're instructed to say, okay, I believe you. Like you said, there's no follow-up. No, I mean, which today, in case our listeners have not applied for mortgages, which is most likely the case, many of them, you have to have all this documentation to support it, tax returns and pay stubs and whatever. You have to prove like this is really the truth.
And sometimes you'll prove it and they'll come back and
they'll say we still don't believe.
Hey, prove it again just to make sure that you still.
So the idea that you could just say any amount of money, anything like that. I did want to clarify real quick, just for the listeners. You mentioned you made a distinction between mortgage brokers and banks. I feel like a lot of our listeners would see those as kind of the same entity. So could you explain a little bit how those things relate to each other?
Yeah, for sure. So typically, like traditionally, if you were getting a loan on a house, like back in the day, they'd just be, I'm going to go to the local bank and they're the ones that do the loan. And I get the loan through the bank. Now you have people that are brokers where they may deal with a dozen different lenders, especially at that time, there were so many, and they could shop around for rates or what type of loan, like, hey, these people are good for residential loans. These people are good for commercial or whatever it may be. So the advantage for a broker was really that you can get deals done pretty quickly and have a little more flexibility. And at that time, it was just a free for all where, I want to buy 5 houses. Okay. And I honestly, I've been out of that game for a long time, so I'm not sure what it's like now. I know when we bought our place here, it was through a credit union and it was very by the book. Like, okay, here's 10,000 pages of bank statements and tax returns and my blood type.
Yeah.
But yeah, back then it was wild. And so, I talked to them and I said, I don't think this is going to be something that's going to last. And weirdly enough, so I had been through that full year and then it was time to go to law school. And I was like, okay, I guess I'm going to go. And randomly, I was, again, everything in my life just ran.
Right. Keeping with
the kind of the lesson maybe. But I'm playing pool with a buddy and his friend. And he's like, hey, he's like, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm going to law school in a couple months at UF, at University of Florida. And he goes, well, have you ever sold advertising? I'm like, no, that sounds boring. And he goes, well, the commissions are really good. And it's like, no. He goes, well, you can work there for a couple months and get paid training. I was like, I guess I could do that for a month. and it was selling, talk about dating people, Yellow Pages ads, phone book
ads.
And this, funny enough, Tampa actually at the time had $100 million in revenue from the phone books from Verizon. It was the biggest market in America. So my buddy was the man, the guy that introduced me. He became my sales manager, and it was a kind of a fun job. It was less stressful than the mortgages. There was like a base pay and health insurance, and you had accounts. So I started doing that, and I realized like I don't want to be a lawyer. I don't want to do this. So it was a week away from classes starting. I wrote the dean. And I was like, I saw something where you could defer enrollment for a year, and he's like, well, yeah, but no one's ever done that. He's like, people don't do that. It's like, it's a really competitive class this year. Are you sure you want to do this? I'm like, yeah. So I deferred for a year. And so
that might have been, sorry, I'm a law school dropout, and I was there, I think, around the year that you would have been there. Oh,
no way.
We were almost law school co-dropouts. I'm assuming you would have dropped.
So we almost been 1L classmates.
Yeah. Right. Anyway,
well,
please keep going.
And it's so funny, like how each generation has their thing. That's like, if you're not sure what to do this. And I feel like our generation, we'll be a lawyer.
Yeah. Like if you're kind of good with words, like go be a lawyer. That's the thing you do when you're good with words.
Yeah. I had that was my thing. Like I'd always loved performing. I'd always loved writing, but like that, my parents were, kind of born in the 40s. Like that wasn't, they're like, be a what? No, get a real job. And so I thought like lawyer, and I didn't know anything about it other than like, well, they wear suits and they have lots of books in their office, and they get to say cool things in court. I think I could do that. No thought. I was like, I want to be an international lawyer. No idea. Literally, I'm like, they travel. I don't know what that means. It sounded really cool. And that was literally my plan. Like, and you got to understand too, for the kids listening, like the internet was in its infancy. So it's not like you could Google something. Like you would have to go on like a weird, like Alta Vista search engine, and you would end up with some guy's, his own, like there was no like
no central resource.
Nobody knew anything. So yeah. And I like, honestly, like that had been my plan all through college. And I remember somebody asked me like, well, don't you want to be an actor or something? And I was like, no, I'll be a lawyer. So I actually,
there's time to do both. Just kidding. There's not.
Right. Yeah. And I ended up having this plan where I wanted to be a lawyer and then be a diplomat. And so I actually joined the Peace Corps after college, and went to the Peace Corps, which I loved. It was great. And, my mother was in the Peace Corps, so she met my dad. My aunt was in the Peace Corps. It was kind of a family thing too. But while I was there, I was like, I really love doing comedy. I love doing this, and had a weird kind of spooky moment. I don't know what you call it, but I woke up one day and like a bolt, like I'm going to move to Chicago and do comedy. And the next morning I was living with a host family. My host mother goes, Kris, I had a vision from God that you were leaving. I was like, what?
Whoa.
Excuse me? When did you have a vision from God? About a week ago. Uh-huh. Yeah. And I talked to our local priest, and she said it was, and he said it was legit. So she didn't say legit.
Legit. Too legit.
That was, that it was pretty, and I was like, wow, it's like, I was actually coming to tell you I'm leaving. So that was a synchronicity there.
Huh.
That is crazy.
So yeah. And I ended up moving to Chicago like a week after 9/11. So yeah, picture like I'm on a plane basically by myself. There's like 3 people on the plane.
Wow.
And that was the shift. So, and I realized, okay, I wanted to do comedy, and like I had friends living there. At that time, Chicago was the improv capital of the world. So there was Second City and Improv Olympic and all these different theaters. And I had friends there. So I just dove into it. And, again, like I think if I had to give advice to what not to do, I would say, don't do what I did at that time, which was I just took any random job. And I had this weird mentality where it's like, well, I don't want to have a job that is too good, because then I won't be committed to my art, and I'll be, I don't know. It was really,
when you say take any job, you mean any job at all, not any job within the entertainment field. You're saying just whatever job to survive.
Any job at all. Yeah. And I almost purposely looked for jobs that were miserable so that I would never feel tempted to stay. Huh. But the bad part is I was always broke. So it's like, So it's like, yeah, I'm doing data entry in a basement at 6 o'clock in the morning in downtown Chicago. Boy, what a great plan that was.
Yeah.
What a genius idea.
So to clarify for our listeners, I think I have no experience in this field, but generally it seems like the model, if there is one, if you're trying to like make it in a lot of areas of the entertainment world, is usually what you're describing. You have a job that keeps you alive, keeps you fed, and your rent paid. And then outside of that time is where you're hoping to do improv,
exactly,
stand up, or whatever it is that one day you hope will lead to like a bigger career.
Exactly. That's the traditional setup. I mean, the waiting tables is a classic actor job because you have flexibility. More recently, like I know a lot of comics that would drive for Uber or DoorDash or those types of jobs. Mm-hmm. And the challenge with it is, short term, it's fine, but like you don't get anything other than the immediate paycheck, right? So like
you're not building toward anything.
You're not building, right? So there's a few elements now that I was actually, when I was talking with some actors on my website, indiefreedom.com, also a small podcast.
Hey, stop. No,
stop plugging your podcast.
Wait, no, actually, I do think I spoke over it. Can you say it again? And I will.
Oh yeah, it's indiefreedom.com. But yeah, basically I just interview my more successful friends.
Is that indie with a Y or indie
with an I?
INDIE, freedom.com.
And it's that freedom with an I.
Freedom with two Y's.
Freedom.
So you said you interview other
basically
people,
I just
in that world.
I interview my more successful friends and just ask them what they do.
That's what we're doing right now.
Okay. So yeah, like one guy, like he has the buddy. We were screenwriters on a project, and now he's like, I was like, hey, aren't you doing a podcast? And he's like, yeah, I've got the #1 fantasy football podcast in the world. I'm like, oh, cool. Tell me about that. Right. So it's like a lot of stuff like that, where like people that have been actors on shows like Daredevil or different TV shows, different directors, comedians. So like I just interview them and just ask them kind of the same kind of stuff. Like, hey, what did you do to make money? How did you get started? But to get back to your point, that day job thing was kind of the norm, especially at that time. I didn't know any better. I think, Mike, you were the only person I knew even that was working online. I remember we talked maybe 10, 15 years ago, and you're like,
yeah, I couldn't remember if I dreamed that conversation or if it really happened.
I don't know. Was it MySpace or something? Like, I can't even remember, but it was something. I remember you mentioned the 4-hour work week, and I was like, 4-hour what?
The who? Yeah.
What? Right. And that kind of blew my mind, honestly. I was like, whoa, that's possible? I had no idea.
Yeah.
So you shifted my course.
Awesome. I hope it seems like it was for the better. I hope it was. maybe you would have like HBO specials now if I hadn't done
way
that.
to go, Mike.
No, I definitely don't.
No, but I was just going to say, for listeners who may not be familiar with that book, it's actually been mentioned a couple of other times by other guests that we've had. What the book was about, I mean, and the author of the book has spoken since writing it years ago, and then said that he's glad that he wrote it, but he would change it now a little bit, if he was going to put it out again. So I'm going to try to like abstract the basic idea of it. But to what Kris was saying, the book was sort of like waking you up to the fact that you don't have to do the same types of jobs that your parents did or that everyone in your community did or whatever. You can, but you don't have to spend 40, 60, 80 hours a week at something if you don't want to. There's like other types of ways that you can sustain yourself, try to build your own company, do all those kinds of things, and also find ways to take what he calls mini retirements throughout your career and travel, volunteer. You can reimagine the way that you work in a way that does not involve you, going to an office or something for 40 or 50 hours a week.
Yeah.
Not that there's anything wrong with doing that kind of office thing if that's what you want, but his thing was like, here's an alternative in case you didn't know there was an alternative. And, especially when it first came out, it went very viral among people like you and I, Kris, who, for whatever reason, had already sort of opted not to do the office thing. Like, you're like, oh, there can be a structured way to do this instead of me just making it up.
Right. It was, and just that idea of lifestyle design. It's like, oh, you want to live somewhere else, or, like, because I never felt, when I worked in offices, but I never felt like I was built for it. Like, I don't know, like, I'm just kind of weird. I like to take breaks in the middle of the day or go for a walk or take a nap. And like, I just like to work when I have energy and not feel like I'm in a chained to a desk all day. But and also I'm kind of an introvert, so people talking to me like, this is good, but like people in my space, like even my wife and kids, I'm like, who are these people with my last name annoying me?
How'd you get this house?
Who are you? Get out of here. And that, I think that's the lesson for kids now too. It's like, there's whatever you want to do, you can figure out a way to do it.
There's a part of the book to, again, kind of talk about like how stuff has changed, even in the short number of years since it was written, because it wasn't that long ago. There's a part in the book, like if you have a job and you're trying to get your employer to allow you to work remote, like here's basically a plan for tricking them into doing that. There was like, start calling in sick or something, but do your job really well. This isn't it exactly, but it was basically like find other reasons why you have to be out of the office, but still do your job really well. And then at some point have a talk and be like, hey, this is going okay. Like, will you let me do this? But now, especially with the pandemic, remote work.
Yeah, people are working remotely. My wife's cousin they were working in LA and they just bought a house in Denver and they're going to just do their jobs in Denver. Like that stuff is so popular now. Like, it's funny, even compared to like now versus a year ago, I used to go for walks in the neighborhood. I would never see anyone. Mm-hmm. Now I see my neighbors all the time. Like, hey, what's going on? Like, everyone's home. I'm like, everyone's home now. I feel like it's an indie band that I was really into that's gotten popular. Like, oh, everyone's working from home.
We're so over that.
Everyone's remote now. But yeah, you can do whatever you want. And I mean, I think, again, like, especially for actors, it was such a challenging thing because it's not just about, like, obviously you need to make money to live, but also your energy management. Like, I'd get home, you're exhausted. For me, I was broke during that time. So, early 20s, like, I would be doing shows and it ultimately, I think, really set me back creative side because, like, I couldn't pay my bills. And I was like, I've got debt. I can't do anything. All right, I'm going to go to law school, because that was the only other option. I thought you're either in a sort of traditional 9-to-5 or you're living the starving artist life. And at that time, especially, and I think a lot of this was my mindset, not necessarily the way things are, everything seemed random. Like, I'd have friends that get on SNL or some other, Mad TV or whatever it was, but there was no pattern. It wasn't like, oh, so-and-so did this or so-and-so did that. It was like, oh, well, yeah, they were they did a show and they got invited to this showcase and then Lorne Michaels was there and then that was it. But like, you could write down a list of, like, on one hand, everyone that blew up and then on the other side who didn't, and there'd be no difference in talent. Like, you couldn't tell. Yeah. Some of the most talented people I've ever worked with, like, you've never heard of them at all.
This is something I've known, not as many as you clearly, but I've known some people who became, like, pretty well known as performers. And I think I have a memory that you did improv in college, right? Weren't you part of the improv troupe? I feel like I remember that.
Yeah.
So, you knew those people and I did some theater in high school and college as well. And, when you do that and you kind of put a lot of energy into it, you people who do it and you're sort of peripherally, it sounds like you're way more than peripherally involved still, but I'm just sort of peripherally, aware of it. And the amount of talent that's just out there walking around, like singing talent, acting talent, people who are very funny, like there's all of this talent out there. And I think a lot of people have an idea that if they are talented, that's kind of all it is. And once you have that, then you're guaranteed to, or not guaranteed, but there's a very good chance you'll be famous and make it big. But that's really not the case, to your point. Like there's so many talented people.
Yeah, talent is maybe like 20%, honestly. Like, because I've known some people that, like, objectively, they're like, ugh, like,
we're not talented. Right?
It's so funny. Like, I can almost guarantee that if I hate your work, you'll probably be famous. Like, there's so many times where I'd be like, oh man, like I was talking, like, doing stand up or something. I'm like, oh my God, that one guy was so bad. It's like, if I was that bad, I just wouldn't do this. Next thing I know, like, he's got an Amazon show and a special and this. I'm like, okay, I'm just wrong every time. Which is fine.
Maybe that is the pattern. Maybe people have to find some way to discuss you. And like, right. Then they're all.
Yeah, that's why I always tell people, like, it's like, my opinion is literally like whatever the opposite of what I think is good is what's going to be popular. But no, really, I think talent's definitely part of it. But I think it's also, consistency, doing the right things. There's a few times where I've seen actors where I'm like, I could just tell, like, they were. Like, I would do things, but I wasn't necessarily either through ego or whatever it was. I'm like, I'm not performing at the places I should be. So you can imagine, like, say in LA, for example, there's theaters, or there were at the time, that were like the hot spots where it's like, okay, if you're an agent or a casting director or a producer, you're going to go see shows at the UCB, which is like a improv theater, or you might go to the Improv or wherever. And so
Upright Citizens Brigade? Is that what?
Upright Citizens Brigade, exactly.
Woohoo! I knew that. Okay,
So
go ahead. Sorry.
that was like the hot spot. But for me, I was like, well, I don't, I don't want to go through classes there. I don't want to too proud or whatever. But that's where people would go. And so I would see people blow up, and I'm like, oh, they were doing. It wasn't just working hard and being talented, but also doing things in the right way. And there's also luck too. I mean, there's everyone's. If you deny luck, it's like, come on, we were all lucky in a sense. Like, hey, if you're healthy, you've got this. So there is that as well. But that's the pattern I've seen, is that combination of like you're consistently producing and not being precious about your work. You're just putting stuff out there.
Can you explain what you mean by being precious?
Yeah, being precious. And this is a problem I had a lot. But it's basically you're like, oh, this isn't good enough to put out. Oh, I can't. Let me work on this more. No, ship it. Just shoot your little video, do whatever. Just keep it moving, because you're going to have to. And this is the same thing for business too, right? It's like, don't be too precious with your product or your marketing plan or whatever. It's like, just go, move faster, because it will never be perfect. Perfection is an illusion. And I find myself that term like action faking, right? Where it's like, I feel like I'm working, but it's like, what's the result?
Yeah. What'd you do today?
Never heard that term.
It's hard to quantify.
Yeah. Cause like, it's all the things that like, okay, the shortest path for achieving this might be getting on the phone and calling somebody, but it's like, oh, instead I want to write out a business plan, and I want to make a really cool marketing funnel where this page and that page. And it's like, okay, yeah, simplify it. Right. So like, yeah, the entertainment industry. So that was my world. And so, even that, like the sales jobs, when I moved to LA, I was like, oh, I don't want to work a job. So I just literally lived off my sales savings the first year I was there. It's like I'd done well. But then sure enough, I'm like, oh, I'm broke again. I need a job. let me go. So I started selling advertising. And this was kind of in the entertainment industry for this travel show. And I found that had a pattern for a while of like either being in that office 9-to-5 world or just trying to scrape by. And there really is a better way. And I think ultimately it's, if you can figure out how to support, especially if you're an artist, like support yourself in a way that supports your vision, that's the ideal, right? So it's like, it's not just making money, but it's also, are you learning something that can help you in your path? Are you getting momentum by connecting with people, right? Like, so like right now there's a lot of momentum because it's like, oh, if I'm talking to this founder or this venture capital firm or whoever, it's like, oh, they'll know people that are referrals, or they're, I can refer them to people and go, hey, oh, you need this? Oh, I know this person. Right. But I couldn't do that if I was waiting tables because I wasn't interested in being in the restaurant industry.
Right. To say too, it's not that waiting tables is inherently bad. If you want to do things in that field, like then that's a way to build that up. But if you don't want to, then
yeah, like if you want to manage a restaurant or start a restaurant, like that's a great thing to do. Right. It's like, hey, I want to, work on a line in the kitchen. Like that's a great job to have because it's something you can take with you. But if you're not interested in that field, then it's like, well, it's going to just be something that you did, but not necessarily give you any momentum.
Doesn't go anywhere if you don't want that.
What do you think is the single most important resource for test preparation? Well, I'd love to say that the most important resources are our black books or our video courses, but that isn't actually true. There's actually something even more important than those resources, which is a set of official test questions to practice with, published by the same company that makes whatever test you're prepping for. So for the SAT, that means you should work with official questions written by the College Board. And for the ACT, that would mean you should work with official questions written by ACT Inc. If you don't know why it's so important to practice only with real practice questions from the test maker, then you're probably missing out on the most important idea in test preparation. To learn more about that crucial idea, keep listening for the special segment at the end of this episode. And for more on the SAT and ACT, head over to questprep.com or search for the SAT Prep Black Book or the ACT Prep Black Book on Amazon.com.
So to clarify, or just to restate, so I'm clear and our listeners are clear, you're saying a better model is... we talked about kind of the classic model of whatever sort of, like you said, waiting tables kind of job you can get to support yourself while you spend all your free time, pursuing this creative career. You're saying, whereas you described that you almost or literally avoided more interesting jobs that you actually might have liked because you didn't want to be tempted away, you're saying it would have been better to take those jobs, kind of commit to the idea of like, let me build a career in an area that I guess you're passionate about and or fits in with the artistic stuff you want to do, and then also do the improv or whatever you're trying to do.
Yeah. And, there may not be a perfect alignment. Like the best example I remember was like Arnold Schwarzenegger, right? Arnold Schwarzenegger was a millionaire before he was ever an actor. He sold bodybuilding courses, he had real estate, and he was a bricklayer. So he and Franco Colombo used to lay bricks, and they had a bricklaying business. It's like, well, what does that have to do with bodybuilding? It's like, well, they're outside, they're getting their tan, they're getting some semblance of exercise, and they have a flexibility of their schedule to work out. So like, it could be just that. It could be just those elements, right? So it doesn't have to, in a perfect world, yes, it would all connect. But even if it's sort of tangential to that, like I had friends that were copywriters or that they produced commercials or they're video editors or a million different things. And even now it's like the only reason I took like a probably 5 or 6 year hiatus from stand-up, and I only got back into it the last year or two because I was able to work from home and go, I can stay out late doing shows because I don't have to be at an office at 8 a.m. So it's like sometimes it's like whatever, if you look at like what you want out of life, like that, like you were talking about earlier, Mike, that lifestyle design, like, okay, do you like to travel? Do you like this, like that? Okay. What can you do that fits that? What can you do that gives you the money for that? What can you do that gives you momentum for whatever your larger goal is?
So don't see them as competing for your time so much. Try to make them work together. Like try to go with, like, be okay with the idea that you're building a career that is not stand up or whatever, but it can at least fit together well with like pursuing the other thing at the same time, sort of.
Yeah. And every single person I know that has gone next level with it has done something to that effect, right? Like, and there's a million different ways. Like I have one friend, she's been on a bunch of TV shows now, and she's a advertising copywriter. So she was a creative director at an agency in New York. Now has her own agency, but she still does TV shows, right? So she's been on a million TV shows. Another guy's a medical doctor and decided he wanted to be an actor. So he was on Jane the Virgin for like 5 years. He's a big star in Colombia on those telenovelas.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but he's still a doctor. Like he has a medical practice. So like there's not one way to do it. I know another guy who's a dog walker and now he's a screenwriter. Another guy, like there's just so many. You just have to have something that's like I think it's really the essence of the long haul, right? Because I think that's where people tend to burn out, myself included, is like you can grind and struggle for a certain amount of time, but after a while you're like, wait, what am I doing? You have to be able to replenish yourself either financially or
figure out a sustainable way to keep moving. Yeah, that makes sense. Huh.
Yeah. And I think even in a broader context of like what you want to do outside of, if it's not the arts, if it's any sort of passion or interest you have, it's like, if you can figure out a way to get paid to learn, that's what's been most effective for me. Like if you can, like I got into copywriting. I'd worked on some stuff like a script doctor on a movie and, sold a couple scripts, but like for a copywriting, I really didn't have that much experience until I was at a job and I basically volunteered. I'm like, hey, I was talking to this magazine. You want me to write an article for this magazine for you? And I just did it. And then, how about this? And like, you just can volunteer and build your portfolio. And then the nice thing too is like your employer, if you're working somewhere cool, is that they'll go, oh yeah, learn this. Right. So it's like, they're not, I, as an employer myself now, I would never be mad if my employee wanted to learn a skill that would help the business. Right.
Yeah. This is something we've talked about a lot, like the inestimable value of, if you're a business owner or a person in a hiring position, of having a person that you can depend on, that they'll show up, that you can trust them. You know what I mean? And you would, like you said, you're so happy if you can make that person even more valuable to you by training them or whatever.
Yeah.
The hard thing to find is just the person who cares, who can communicate with you, who will show up when they're supposed to. And then, once you've established that, there's so much value there. Even if you feel like underqualified as the hiree, you can get the qualifications, that you can work on. But if, that relationship and trust is like kind of the foundation of so much.
Yeah. And I mean, so many things too. It's like, you'll be shocked at how much you can up level in a fairly short time with consistent focus, right? Like I knew nothing about email marketing. And then 2 years, 3 years later, it's like, I'm running email marketing for companies, so it's like, it doesn't take that much time. And I think when you're in it, it's a lot. Like I know myself, like it's one, like you remember being in college and like you'd learn something like, that's interesting, get cocktail party information. But if you don't get the chance to apply it, it's just, you know what I mean? Like, okay, that's great. But like, you don't get to put it into action. I think that's the big difference between being in school and being out in the real world. Is in school, you are always geared towards being judged, right? Like I need the gatekeeper, the teacher, the test. Ooh, I need an A. Let me cram for the A. Now I don't remember anything the next day. But in real life, it's like, it's not, you'll probably get a C the first time you do it in real life. But that's okay. Because guess what? Next week, it's a B. Next week, it's a B plus. Week after that, now you're an A. So like there's so many things with an iterative process where you can just keep getting better. And I think to your point earlier, I think like if you can just have your job pay you for that, that's ideal, right? Rather than trying to constantly, and there's nothing wrong with learning on your own time. Of course, that's great. But if you can, get paid to learn. You know, there's so many things you can do. There are kids now that are millionaires on TikTok and Twitch. And, you know, I think the coolest thing, you know, especially if you're in high school or college, is that the internet's available. And so whatever you want to do, you can start doing it now. You can start, if you really are interested in technology or advertising or whatever it is, like you could start your business, start freelancing, start, like you don't have to wait. It's like not this like, okay, now I'm in the real world. You know, it's like, no, you can literally start right. And there's no better time than now because there's a pandemic, everybody's remote. I mean, and you know, what's so funny? It's like, I used to be so obsessed with my grades and test scores. And it's like, I've worked with Fortune 500 companies and Silicon Valley people. It's like 0 times has anyone ever asked me what my GPA was.
Yeah. Right.
What, you know what I mean? Like, oh, how did you do in that constitutional law? Like, they're like, college, we don't, like, they do not care. It's like, the only thing they care about is solving their problem.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Solving their problem. Like, and it's like, I'm not going to check. Like, they could be like, I went to Yale and have 10 degrees. I don't care, bro. Whatever. Like, you could lie. I don't care. Like, just solve my problem.
Yeah.
You know? So like, I think that's the biggest shift I've seen within society as a whole, but even with myself, is like status is such a trap. Like Naval Ravikant talks about this, where it says, you know, don't chase status, like chase wealth, chase learning, because status is a zero-sum game, right? Like there's only one valedictorian. There's only so many people that get into X school or Y school, but everyone can do well. And it's like, if you're constantly chasing status, you're doing that at the expense of A, your own sanity, but B, like your real growth.
Yeah. Because
like you're getting locked into these little games, like being political, like say if you want to rise to the ranks in some company, which if that's what you want to do, it's cool. But like sitting in meetings and brown nosing all the time, it's like, is that what you really want? Or is it just something you feel like you want because an important person looks like that? Like, that's why I wanted to be a lawyer, because I'm like, oh, they seem important. Yeah. They wear a suit.
Yeah, you mentioned the books. The suit.
They have a book. Yeah, the books, right? They have. I'm an international lawyer. I'm like, what are you talking about? And you know what's so funny? I remember I interned at a courthouse, and I was like, this is the most boring thing I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah,
I never want to do this. Actually, seeing lawyers do the day. My brother's a lawyer now too, and I'm like, this looks awful. I would hate. Even like, I remember once, like, I was a witness in a lawsuit, and they're like just sitting in this meeting, and they're like, I mean, like pouring over these documents, and they're like, well, this deposition, we've got to say, would you say that it was? I'm like, I'd rather do nothing than do this. Like, awful. But some people love it and they're great at it, you know?
Yeah.
So I think that's the other thing too. It's like the idea of something is fine, but like, see what you can do. Like if you like, I want to be a doctor. Why? Well, I like helping people. Cool. Go intern at a hospital for a month. Just see what it's like day to day. Like don't let it be in your head. Start doing it. And that's even true for the arts. Like I'll talk to people that are like, oh, I want to do stand up, and what's my stand up style? Shut up and do an open mic. I don't want to hear it. Like, I don't want, just get up on stage. Like, you will figure it out. Don't have everything in your head. You have to put it out in the real world. Because if you're even being too precious with your ideas is a trap, right? Because you have the most beautiful song in your head. Cool, go sing it.
Find out.
And you'll probably be off key, and then you'll fix it. I think that's that feeling of unrealized potential where it's like, oh, I could have done this. And then you don't because you're worried about it being bad. But yeah, spoiler alert, it will be bad. It will. Nobody's good at the beginning. Then you'll get better.
I think for a lot of people, to your last point, there's something about having the potential belief that if you tried it, you could be amazing. And you don't want to risk losing that belief by having it collide with reality, by having you try it. It's not amazing.
And
I lost my thing that sustained me was the belief that I could have been really good at this. Now I'm not.
Yeah. And I don't know if this was like this for you in high school, but I remember when we were in high school, it was like this feeling of like, I want to get A's, but I don't want to try.
Yeah, you don't want to
You know,
try
that was the kind
fail
of,
and
like,
then
the goal.
know that about yourself that you that you did give it your all and it didn't work out, and you have to know
It didn't work out. Or even just sort of the slacker mentality. It's like, well, yeah, I got an A, but I didn't.
Yeah, that was I just kind of was thinking about this the other day. How there's obviously different generations of of people, and every generation kind of has its own
culture, mindset.
Yeah, has its own ideals. That was a big one for us. That was the guy, I think it maybe even came, I was trying to trace it back. I think it came from maybe certain movies or something, but there was the
generation,
effortless.
Yeah,
uncaring,
the genius who
person.
was too cool to go to school, actually too cool for school,
Good Will Hunting, and
that kind of thing. I could do that, but I'm just too smart for it, so I won't even.
Poisoned the whole generation of people.
Being too smart to be successful.
Yeah, and actually, now that you mentioned Good Will Hunting, there's the thing that Robin Williams' character tells him in that he's like, you are bound by nothing. What are you going to do? Are you just going to sit back and not have done anything?
Yeah.
And then look back at your life, I'm paraphrasing, and be like, well, I could have done anything.
Yeah.
I chose to do nothing.
And I think a lot of that comes from you're living in your head. You have whatever that is stopping you. You're the unsung genius. And it's for me, what's always helped is being concrete with things, rather than what's my grand vision for life? Make your bed. Go outside.
Do one thing right now.
Do some laundry. What are you talking about? Get up and pick up the phone. Stop it. I always have to stop myself if I'm action faking and I'm and it's fun to brainstorm. It's fun. That stuff's perfect. But don't do that all day. Right. You have to get something done. And even for me, if I'm, with stand up, what's my stand up? Shut up and go on stage. Stop. Just figure it out. Stop trying to think about what the end result is before you do anything.
So I've been resisting just asking you all about all of the entertainment related stuff because I really want to know all about it. I also, there's all the webinar stuff, which we've covered a little bit, and I do want to know more about. So you mentioned in a very impressively casual way that you've sold a couple of scripts. So I'd like to hear more about that, what those were, what the process was, what that means.
I mean, not for huge money or anything, but
Sure, yeah, but whatever it was, that's an interesting thing.
Well, that's probably even more representative of what the average screenwriter goes through, especially in the beginning. Can you kind of just describe the process was?
So there's basically, if you can imagine, there's kind of two different worlds with screenwriting. At the top level is your, Aaron Sorkin or people like that are $5 million for a script, and, or you get paid to write a script, right? They're you pitch somebody and you're okay, I'm going to pitch you. It's robots in space and they know karate. Okay, space, robot, karate. And then they pay you for an outline, they pay you for a treatment.
So what you're saying is a situation where you have not written a script yet, but you tell them an idea you have and they say, we'll pay you to write it, as opposed to writing the whole script ahead of time, showing it to them and saying,
exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's
two different versions of the experience. Yeah.
And some people, people do write on spec, which is what that latter is called, where you kind of write it on your own and sell it. A great example might be Mad Men, right? Matthew Weiner was writing on The Sopranos, but he wrote a pilot for this other show about advertising people in the 60s. So he had written the initial pilot and then sold it from there. And there's kind of obviously levels of there's big studios, there's indie companies. So I sold mine to kind of independent producers. And it was, again, random. There's no rhyme or reason to it. A buddy of mine that we had done improv in Chicago, he was living in Arizona, and he's and at that time I had just written a web series. It was on YouTube and some other things. And so there was stuff out there. And he says, yeah, man, I'm working on this comedy out here in Tucson, and the script's really bad. Do you think you could come work on it? And I was okay. So they flew me out, and I gave them some notes, and I was I don't know, guys, I think you want to restart. He said, well, how much would it be just for you to write everything from scratch? I don't know. And I just quoted him a price. And it was awesome. It was my first time really diving into that. And so we basically camped out in this guy's mansion in the hills of Arizona, writing all day.
Wow.
Yeah, it's my friend Drew Grubick and another guy, Jason Moore, he's incidentally the one with the #1 fantasy football podcast. So we were all working on it, and it was we were just literally writing all day, 12 hours a day, making each other laugh, writing scream, and then we would give them pages, and they go, okay, we're gonna start shooting. We're not even done.
No, you're not.
With the script, but they would so we would write pages 1 through 15. They would start shooting 1 through 15. And then we would start doing 15 through 30. So it was wild. I don't think the movie turned out too well, but I've actually never seen it, but it's out there. don't know if I want to say the name. I don't even know if they use our pages, to be honest. But so that was my first time. Another time was a friend he was a VFX, like a video effects designer. He did a lot of stuff on like Iron Man and these type of special effects type of things. And he was pitching a movie, a comedy movie, and he had like an idea. And so he was like, oh, and do you want to work on this? So again, like just quoted him a price, and we knocked out a pilot, or basically like a spec script on that he had sold, and we got a little bit of money from that. It stayed in what they call development.
Sure.
Can I say hell? H-E?
Yeah.
He's like development hell, which basically means like a movie, like it never gets made. It's like people like, oh, this is cool, but either for budget reasons or whatever.
Yeah.
Like
there's a ton of steps in the process, and somewhere along those steps, it doesn't.
It just never happens. Like that book Confederacy of Dunces, classic. They've been trying to make that movie for 40 years. Like everyone's done scripts for it. Steven Soderbergh had a great script for it.
That's the perfect name for a book that nobody can manage to make into a movie. Nobody can make. It just describes like all the people who are working on it. Yeah.
It just never gets made. It's like probably like 50 years from now they'll make it. But it's like there's a lot of things like that are like, why haven't they had a movie of that? Like
they're trying.
Yeah.
It's not because they haven't thought of it.
Yeah, they're trying. So yeah, that was basically it. I mean, I had done writing, comedy sketches in college and in Chicago. And so that was kind of my screenplay. And I think what burned me out on that was like working really hard and then maybe not having anyone even read it.
Not feeling like there was gotcha.
Right. For nothing, kind of, in a sense, potentially for nothing. Yeah.
For nothing. Yeah. So it's like, I spent 3 months on this, and someone going like, oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Throw it on the pile. Yeah.
And it's not even the money so much as just like because like a screenplay is just like a blueprint, right? Like it's not anything. It's not like someone reads screenplays for fun unless you're in the business. It's not like a book. So, that's what kind of burned me out on that and trying to sell it. And I was like, what am I doing? So yeah, that I had done that. And then, done a web series. So we had shot a bunch of these little, vignettes, basically. This was back when
when you say we shot them, who's we?
Oh yeah, it was me and then a couple of friends that I was in acting school with at the time. We had produced this. It was a web series about an acting school, so it was kind of a very meta comedy. We had Dennis Haskins was in it. He was the principal on Saved by the Bell.
Awesome.
Back in the day, 30, 40 years ago. And it was super fun. And so like that was I liked having things that were finished, and so getting used to production. So the kind of dovetails, I guess, with the webinars of like, okay, it's a made video, and we actually incidentally have a new video offering we're launching in a few weeks. But I think when you get practice in one area, you get to see how that can play out in different ways. And I think like anything, it's like when you get that momentum and just seeing how it can apply, because it's not like, I honestly don't think that if you're 15 years old right now, I don't think you're going to have one job or one business your whole life. You might have 10 businesses. You might do a million different things, but they'll just dovetail together. Right. Because trends change, people do different things. Like I doubt I'll be doing webinars 20 years from now. Right. There'll be something else. We'll be in the Matrix.
Holograms. Yeah.
Be holograms. But like if you can, whatever principles from your work, whether it's sales or building a product or whatever that is, you'll find what opportunities are out there.
So I also wanted to ask in the vein of the scripting, because my secret thing that I want to be is like some kind of a TV writer. I don't know anything about it. I need to follow all the advice that you're giving here because of like actually doing stuff. So when you what was the first thing that you can remember doing? I think you might have just mentioned it. That was in the vein of like script writing. I think you mentioned writing scenes for like improv stuff. Like what's the earliest memory you have that was like basically like your step one?
Yeah. The very first one I had written, I was in fourth grade writing a short story, and then like in high school writing a comedy sketch for the senior sketches, like that's probably the first iteration of that. And then in college, having a sketch comedy group, just basically a smaller version of it. TV writing is tough. TV writing is very much a gatekeeper profession where it's like there's a ton of competition. I know a few TV writers and every single one of them has a different path. One of them was a comic and he got to know other comics. And he was, when we talk about hustle, like this guy was incredible. Like he was out every night, 8-10 hours a night doing stand up, hanging out with people, getting to know people. Which is something I did not do enough at all, being an introvert. But like, if you want to do that. And so sure enough, one of his friends booked a TV pilot. And so he became a writer's assistant on the TV show and then got bumped up to staff writer, writing specs. Now he writes some other shows, like those kind of like CBS, NBC type of comedies. There are also fellowships like the ABC, like Disney has one, NBC has one, basically like some are for diversity and some are just for new writers in general. But basically you
like programs that you try to get into.
Yeah. Like you submit your scripts, like a spec script for a show. Like they'll say, hey, write a show or write an episode of Modern Family or some new thing that's on TV, and then write an original, and they'll go through, they'll test you. So I knew people that did that. Some people get jobs as PAs, like production assistants. There's an old joke that like being a writer's assistant is actually the toughest job in Hollywood to get, because on a TV show, there's 10, 20 writers, but there's one writer's assistant. Right. So it's like, it's kind of a weird thing where it's like, you have to kind of weasel into that. Like that world specifically is a little tough. It's definitely doable, but you have to, like, realistically, you're going to be in LA or New York.
I was going to say, my understanding is that it's very geographically dependent. Like you need to be where this is happening.
Yeah. Because that, and I don't know how it is now with the pandemic, but that's typically the way. There are people that get, and again, but the thing is too, it's like, you know, the old saying is like, nobody knows anything. There are people that didn't do that, right? So like Nick Pizzolatto, he created True Detective. He was a English professor, and then he wrote a couple novels and short stories. And one of his novels, I think it was Galveston, got super popular. And everyone's like, oh my God, you're incredible. And he got signed to some literary agency, and then he got staffed on a TV show called Justified. And while he was on Justified, wrote the pilot for True Detective. So like there are weird ways of doing that too. Like if you have some expertise, like, you know, you're a homicide detective and you write
that world. So you
like
write a story.
There are ways to do it. But I think in general, to get in out that unusual way, you need some kind of heat.
Sure.
To get, like, it's not just like, I wrote this cool script. They're like, dude, there's 10,000 good scripts. Like you kind of have to get, but there are ways to do it. Yeah. TV's a tough, but then, you know, the other thing too, is that like now the idea of TV is changing, right? Like they're streaming.
Well, you just described shooting a web series just with a couple friends of yours, you know what I mean? On YouTube, or I don't know if it's on YouTube or whatever it is.
And it's funny because like, I know more people that have gotten big that way, starting a YouTube channel, TikTok, Vine. Vine's not even around.
Yeah.
But whatever. I mean, you can, I would say like realistically, like, you know, and obviously shooting a whole TV pilot would be, you know, kind of a nightmare financially, but like you can put stuff out there and, you know, short form type of content. Like you can, if what you really, that's the thing too, of like changing like when you think about what you really want, as opposed to just the conditions of like, well, I want to write for TV. It's like, well, what do you really want to do? Like, do you want to write a story that is told online or, you know, video? It's like, okay, you can do that. A friend of mine, Chris Alvarado, he and this lady, I can't remember her name. I think Avatar Ash, I think is her name. They did a web series called 7P10E. And funny enough, this is years before the pandemic, but it was about a long distance couple. And the entire web series is just them on Skype calls, dating on Skype. Well, it got picked up by CBS as a TV show. They got optioned. It became kind of, even though it didn't get like a ton of views, it got like everyone in the industry, like Tobey Maguire was like, oh my God, this thing is so good. Like all these directors and actors saw it and they got a development deal from it. And it's like literally, like it could not have cost less to make. It was literally free to make because it's just like this. Like
I was going to say it was just what we're doing right now.
Yeah, literally. And so it's like I think the ultimate thing is to like, you know, whatever you can do. And I got to take my own advice with this, but like put your stuff out there, no matter what that is. Like music. Like there's this rapper, this kid Russ. He's like 25, 26 years old, massively successful, and his strategy was he put out a song a week, just one song a week for 2 years, kept building his catalog. Now he makes 20 million a year. No label, nobody discovered him. Like he just kept putting stuff out there. Or
do you know, this might be too demanding of a question because I'm sure you're not like his agent or whatever. You said there's no agent. Do you know what the model is? Like, is it advertising for views? Like, what is it? Where does the money come from in a situation like that? If you know, I mean, I like it's not your world. I don't know necessarily.
Yeah. Basically, I was going to reach. I think I have a copy of his book, but basically, he put his stuff out. To my knowledge, like on SoundCloud, like those kind of free sites, there's something called TuneCore. It's like kind of a way to like to sell your music, like, you know, like a Spotify streams and stuff like that. I don't know exactly how that works, but I think you put your music on TuneCore and that allows you to sell it. So basically he was getting a ton of traction, right? So people like maybe the first song got 100 plays and the second one got 200 plays, but it kept building. So
was he getting like paid per stream, or were people downloading like
getting paid per stream? Okay. Yeah. And then I think you could, and I think maybe album sales as well. Like if you put out this and then touring, right? So
that's supposed to be
as you got popular, it's like, oh, you can go. And so I think now, especially with the reach of the internet, that was for him like genius, right? And it's like, so he had ownership of everything too. And that's something, no matter what you're doing, it's like, if you have ownership, you do not need to be as successful, because it's like, imagine like the old school music days of like, okay, I wrote a song, I performed it, blah, blah, blah. Well, the label owns it and you get a teeny royalty. It's like, how about you take 80% of the royalties, or 90% or 100%? Like, so when you have ownership, you make a ton more money. So I think for him, like he had ownership of his songs, had the stuff kept going out there. And then, he had
t-shirts or who knows,
songs blow up on SoundCloud, t-shirts. I mean, and I see pictures of this. I was like, and I'm not really, not really in the same generation. So I'm like, wait, who is this guy? And he's doing stadiums in the Philippines and South America and Saudi Arabia. And like, these stadiums of people. And it's like, it's insane. Right. So, and that's like any of them. Like Jason has a podcast. I'm like, dude, I didn't even know he had a podcast. It's the number one podcast in the world for fantasy football. I'm like, I didn't even know that was like fantasy football. Like, and that's the thing too. It's like, there's so many weird things, like a niche that it's like most people like, that's the new type of celebrity is going to be this niche celebrity where it's like 1 million people are like, they love you, but you walk down the street, nobody knows who you are.
Yeah.
They're like, who? So like and I think that's probably the best of both worlds, right? Like, I don't know why you'd want to be recognized by everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the dream. Yeah.
But you can find your audience and you can find your customers, right? It's like I work with, for my webinar business, I have customers all over the world, like Australia, Europe, the Ukraine, India, obviously North America. So it's like, and then I hire people other places too, like people that work here and people work in the Philippines and Russia, like wherever. It's like, you can just connect with people with the internet now more than ever. So whatever weird thing you want to do, there's probably a market for it. There's probably some weird, like, I mean, I think I always love hearing weird stories about like, I teach juggling lessons. You're like, what? Juggling lessons? It's like they're a millionaire. I know a guy who makes a grip of money teaching banjo stuff or some kind of like weird music stuff online. I'm like, what are you talking about? But there's, if you find 1,000 hardcore banjo players, like you can make some money.
Yeah.
And I think that's the power of like following your interests and also I think the number one thing that's helped me is knowing a market. So it's like, I got into software randomly just because it's like, I needed a job, but day in and day out, I'm like understanding like the challenges and going, oh, okay, this is how you sell it. This is how you market it. Whatever that is, e-commerce. Like if I was 15 years old, I'd probably be looking at e-commerce and doing that because that's blowing up or whatever that is. Because the more you know it, you're going to see more opportunities and see problems to solve rather than going, what kind of business can I start? It's like, ugh, you're not. How can I make $1? Oh boy, I'm gonna be in trouble.
I wanted to ask also, as I said, I'm just leaning into wanting to know all the entertainment related stuff. We talked about the idea that a lot of this stuff can be very geographically based, and you hear about New York, Chicago, LA. You don't normally hear about Boise, Idaho as like a hub where you said you are now for entertainment type stuff. So I assume you said you got back into comedy relatively recently. Was that part of what you were looking at? Like whether there was a place nearby where you could go do shows? Where do you do those shows? Like how does that work in your life right now, I guess?
No. I was like, when we were moving out of LA, I was done with everything. Okay. I'm done working in offices. I'm done doing stand-up. I'm done. I was like, I've got a wife, I've got 2 little kids. We had an infant at the time and a toddler. I was like, I don't have time for anything. And that was the thing too. It's like starting a family. It's like, I can't be out all night at a nightclub doing a show, like come home. And so, I moved to Boise and it was truly just lifestyle. Like we had visited here, loved it. And I was like, I'll tell the story on the podcast. It's fine. So I'm not a big crier in life. Like I didn't cry when my kids were born. I didn't cry when I got married. I just don't cry. I was driving around Boise, Idaho, weeping hysterically. And I called my wife and I was like, I don't think, and I was like, babe,
what's happening?
She's like, what does that sound? Are you crying? You didn't cry when our kids were born. You didn't cry.
This is the first thing that mattered. Yeah.
uncomfortable moment, right? But I really like felt a real connection with this place. And I think that's the cool thing now for kids too, is like, however you want to live, you can figure it out. So I was like, this was back in 2016. I was like, God, we want to, I was like, God, I want to move here. So it took some planning, right? So it's like, okay, little kids, and it's like getting a business going. But I knew I wanted to live here, and it was purely for lifestyle. I love the people. I like the mountains. I grew up in Florida. So like I'd never been around snow or mountains. So it's like, oh, this is so neat. So the entertainment stuff happened later when I was here and kind of settled, and like I had control of my time again. I wasn't commuting 2 hours a day. I wasn't in a cubicle. I wasn't, I was just working from home, and I was like, oh, I miss doing stand-up. So I just, again, like went to an open mic, got back into it, started performing at the local club. That all kind of stopped, obviously, with the pandemic, but that free time allowed me the mental space to go, okay.
So you just Googled open mic, Boise, Idaho. Like, how did you even, whatever place you ended up doing? Yeah.
Yeah. I think I looked on like Facebook or Google or something. Yeah. There was, the open mics. There's like one comedy club in town. And then there's some like other breweries and places like that. Yeah. I just started getting to know people here and doing shows, and it was fun. Like after a long hiatus, getting back into it again and starting from scratch with new material. Cause like, but I hadn't done stand up since I'd been married. So it's like all my old stuff was like single guy material, but now it's like, oh, I've got a baby. I've got this, I've got that. And it was great, and I guess my challenge now is like, okay, what do I do now? Cause like I'm not performing in front of crowds from the pandemic, but like, so that even I have to take my own advice and go, okay, what else can I do? So
when you, this is a question I've always wanted to ask a comedian. So here we are. When you hear about, I watch like comedians in cars getting coffee, or you hear, these comics like talking about their routine and like the grind of working however many nights a week and all that kind of stuff. And then they also talk about how it's a big deal to get whatever it is, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 8 minutes of like solid material that you can do. So on the one hand, you have this idea of, well, that you can do that like is reliable, solid, that people are going to laugh at, or, as much as you can predict that. And then they talk about this idea of working so many nights per week all the time. Like if you were gonna, or if you, I don't know if you do this or if friends of yours do, have that kind of a grinding schedule, are they trying out new stuff every single night? Are they keeping the stuff that worked from last time and then adding new things in? Are they doing the same routine over and over again until it's perfect? Like, it seems daunting, intimidating, I guess, to try to imagine, if you're working 3 nights a week, are you doing like a whole new set of concepts, each of those nights? Like, what is that structure like, if as much as you can?
Yeah, it really depends, and it depends on the person too. I mean, personally, I would try to get up as much as I could just to be in the rhythm of it. It's kind of like going to the gym. It's like, you don't want to go to the gym once a week. It's like, I've been working out once a week for 5 years. Like, why don't you go more than a week and see if that'll, right? So I would try to get up 4 or 5 times a week if I could, so even twice a night if I could. I like to do new stuff frequently. So maybe every day I'll do a new 3 minutes, new 5 minutes. Sometimes I'll get up with just an idea and riff. I would do that a lot, especially or do crowd work where I'm like talking to the crowd, just to be in the flow of it and generate new material. And then other times, you're going to come back to some bits that you like. Maybe you add what's called a tag, where it's like an additional part of the joke, or you cut something out. Like you record your sets and go, oh, this part right here is a little slow. Let me cut this out. How can I stack this so it's a bit more impactful, or can I add anything here? And you can always play with it too. I mean, it's like, you're not like, you're never really married to the material. That's kind of an old school thing of like, if you're doing something for TV and you can't swear and it has to be 3 minutes long, but especially now in comics do the same thing too with putting out content. Like Andrew Schultz, I think, is the most famous example of this recently, where he was a comic in New York grinding. He was, had some success, but could not get a special to save his life. He started putting clips out on YouTube frequently, was on Joe Rogan's podcast, was on this, that, put out stuff, and now he's huge. Like now he sells out
clips of him on stage in a club, or clips of him, like clips of videos
in a club. Yeah. And he would shoot stuff. He would shoot stuff with like different things where like he and his friends working on jokes and talking about jokes, or shoot things where he's riffing with the crowd, or, he'd have all kinds of podcasts and different things. So he just kept having material out there. And I think for comics, that seems to be the direct path to the audience, right? It's like, you'll see like a lot of comics with a big podcast. They have a Patreon. It's like that subscription thing. They sell their own merch, and like, there's no agent. Yeah, they might have an agent, but it's not like there's no gatekeeper for them. It's like they're making $50,000 a month or $100,000 a month on their Patreon, and it's like they just do whatever they want. So like that's a neat way to you're still doing comedy, but it's not just on stage doing stand-up. It's like, oh, you've got your podcast, you've got this, you've got that. You're just doing what you do.
Huh.
Can I, sorry, I've wanted to be a comedian, I think from the time I first realized that they existed. So I would definitely love to talk to you about this, but I had some questions I wanted to ask about earlier in your trajectory, and we're going to run out of time in a few minutes. Is it okay if I jump back to that other stuff? Is that Patrick?
Fine.
Am I cutting off here? Okay. All right. Yeah. Sorry. It's a complete gear shift back to.
No, I mean, I did also. Yeah, I did want to get back to that. There's plenty to cover there.
So yeah, I almost feel bad. I hate abandoning a train of thought, but here I'm just going to do that. So, yeah. So back when you were younger and your plan was to be an international lawyer without really knowing what that meant, did you pick a major and an undergrad school based on that goal? Or how did that look?
Yeah, my concentration was international relations in political science.
Okay.
Which is kind of like a useless degree unless you go to law school. Or like, well, I'm going to law school anyway. Yeah, that was it. And then I minored in religion. I just thought it was interesting. So I took a lot of religion classes. But really, if I look back to college, like doing improv was most of my free time. Like I was in the campus improv group. I had a sketch comedy group. I was constantly rehearsing and doing little shows at the bars around town. I remember like the Purple Porpoise and the bars in Gainesville. So that's what I mean, like, honestly, like if I look back to college and what I remember most, it would be the improv stuff, like classes and my major, like not really at all. But I think in that sense, it was transformative for just being in that zone of doing performances all the time.
Was there a moment when it sounds like, unless I'm misunderstanding, it sounds like when you first went to college that the performance thing was not, like you didn't plan on that being a huge focus. Was there like a transformative moment when you were on campus where you were like, oh, I want to do that? Yeah. And again, totally random. Like everything, it's like all serendipitous. Like remember back when like swing dancing was really popular? Like that was the I do.
So this was, I want to say freshman year of college. And that was like my way of talking to girls. And I was pretty good at it. So I was going with this girl to a nightclub to swing dancing night. And she introduced me to a couple people. She's like, oh, hey, this is Bill and Danny. They're at Theater Strike Force. I'm like, theater what?
Theater Strike Force. I forgot about that.
It's the improv group. And I remember asking them, like, what's improv? And they're like, oh, it's where you make it up on the spot. It's like, whose line is it anyway? And when I was a kid, I watched comedy obsessively, like the British version of Whose Line Is It Anyway? And clips on VH1 of stand-up. So I'm familiar with it. To this day, I'm like, why did I say that? In these strangers in this nightclub, I go, I bet I'd be really good at that. I bet I'd be really good at that. And they're like, okay, why don't you just come to a rehearsal? I don't know what. And so I showed up, I think a couple of days later, and that, the rest was history, So like it was, but I didn't even know it existed. And I certainly wasn't thinking about that. So it was truly like, I was thinking about certain moments in my life where like, if I hadn't been in that place, what would have happened? Like, I was like, I'd never even heard of it up until then. I certainly like, you know what I mean? Like I was doing other stuff. So like, it's always those weird little moments where it's like, if I wasn't playing pool with that guy that was doing the advertising stuff, or if I wasn't, whatever that is, like, what would it be? Like, no idea, So that's your life, is a moment and these weird little moments that can dramatically shift your trajectory.
Well, and that's one of the things as sort of a theme for this podcast. I mean, not an intentional theme, but it's just kind of come up in every talk. There are those moments. And thinking in terms of my own experience, and I don't know if yours was similar or not, if you had told me when I was in high school or college that it would be those kinds of spur of the moment decisions and chance encounters that would like plant the seed for the thing that you would really get interested in and kind of, proceed with, I wouldn't, first of all, have believed that probably. And then secondly, even if I had somehow come to believe it, I would have been like, okay, so how do I plan to have those chance encounters? And you can't, so like, what is the...
And that's what they try to drill in your head too, right? For a kid, they're like, okay, well, it's the SAT, you got to go to this school, you got to major in this, you got to do that. Like, you have to plan out your whole life. And you're like, come on, like, that's not real. Yeah. And
it is for some people, but for most people,
some people it is. Yeah. If you know, you've always wanted to be a dentist. You know, my daughter's 3 years old. She's like, Daddy, I want to be a doctor. I'm like, I believe it. Cause I see the way she like focuses when she's with her toys and like see science stuff. I'm like, yeah, I got to save up for some medical school right now. Right. So some people that it is, but like, I think for a lot of people, it's like here's the other thing that stinks for kids is that like you get pushed into these certain career paths that you may be miserable, B, not even that lucrative. Like a lot of the status professions, like they don't really make much money. And it's like,
not anymore for sure. Like
not anymore.
There's an idea that they did once.
Yeah.
They used to.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, it's not really as secure as you think it's going to be. It's not as invigorating or fun as it's going to be. So like, but people, and then they get the regret because they're like, well, I've got $200,000 in student debt. I've got this, I can't leave.
Yeah.
And that's what because it's changed so much since we were in school.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you know, we had the National Merit Scholarships.
Yeah. And I even remember thinking when I was in school that it was insane. And it's 1,000 times worse now than it was.
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't imagine, right? It's like, and we knew, like, I knew people that like, they just worked to pay for college. Like they just had, you know, they worked part-time, they paid their tuition and paid rent and like, you know, working 20 hours a week. Yeah. Now it's like, that would be impossible. Like, how could you even, so I don't know. But again, now that you have so many options, it's like, you don't have to do that one path if you don't want to. You can do anything you want to do.
And I think it's also important to keep in mind, like, we're not suggesting that you just suddenly on a whim change your entire life. Like, what we're talking about is the situation where, like, for me, it was fencing. Fencing had an impact on my life. It can't even be calculated. I'm obviously not a professional fencer now.
So this is not building fences, but hitting people with swords, just so people who don't have any context. Mike was on the...
Not selling stolen property.
Right.
Yeah, or fencing. Exactly. Yeah. Being a fence for organized crime.
You took me to a fencing session one time. It was so hard.
I feel like I remember that. Yeah.
It was I was like, how do you do? You're holding the thing. Right. But so what was it about fencing that really resonated for you?
I don't know. I mean, I have a memory of what it was. It's not my interest in it now. I mean, and my interest is purely like passive academic. Like, I don't do it anymore. I would love to again at some point, but I don't right now. So what I like about it now, what I look back on now and say, oh, like, it set me up to understand these kinds of things and to do this kind of thing and interact in this kind of way with people. You know, that's one thing. What I liked at the time, I think I had just always wanted to fight people with swords. And I think
it's pretty cool, right?
Yeah.
It's like, it resonates and it feels like, oh, this feels like home. Like I feel like,
right. And so the thing is,
you feel it.
Yeah. So we're not saying like, just throw all your plans out the window and go, you know, join the first club and do that. That isn't it at all. What we're talking about is a situation where something grabs you. And to some extent, this has happened. The people that we've talked about have mentioned this kind of thing happening, at various points in their own lives. Something grabs you, and without making an effort, you just start doing it a lot because you like
fall into it.
You're good at it.
Yeah.
And it snowballs. And before you know, you look back and you're like, oh, I've been fencing for 20 years. Or, oh, I live in Chicago now and I do it. Like, it's because you wanted to. Each step is something you wanted
impulse, to do. And it's like, just try it. You know, it's like, what's the big, especially if you're 18, 20 years old, like, especially if you're saying stuff like, I've always wanted to X.
Yeah.
Just go to a class. Like,
give it a shot. And if you don't like it, then you don't have to pursue it and end up doing, like, we're not saying you have to do that. It's those kinds of things that absorb you. And I mean, really, like you said, improv obviously in itself and acting, performing, all that stuff in itself obviously is still a huge part of what you do and what you're into. But it's more than that in terms of how it shaped your life. Like, it led you to be in these places where you got these jobs doing these types of sales things. It led you to be playing pool that night and do the other sales thing. And then that led you to...
Yeah, that was a friend that I did improv with in college. Like,
right, exactly. And that's the kind of way that it influences your life.
And especially now, I mean, even in the corporate world, I did a gig with Micron Technology. That's a big, technology company. And the first thing they said on the phone call was, I didn't know you were a comedian. I was like, what? I didn't know that. They're like, oh, I was listening to some podcast you were on about your blah, blah, blah. And I just mentioned it offhand. They're like, we really want some humor in our marketing copy. And so it's like, I ended up writing some little, so it's like, you don't have to compartmentalize your life as much as you think, right? Because I know I always had a thing like, I don't want to tell people what I do because then they're going to think I'm not committed. Because first off,
audience, sorry, you couldn't see this, but just now Kris made a very cute gesture, like
very protective.
Watch the video podcast, people. Watch the YouTube. But yeah, I mean, your life is your life. And it's like, I don't know. I feel like this. I mean, I was just interviewing new employees yesterday. And it's like, I started asking the question of like, well, where do you see yourself in 5 years? I'm like, give me a break, dude. Like, what do you want? My dream is to always work at, like, come on, it's not real. Like, just tell me what you're into. What do you like to do? And like, it's not. So like, you live your life. Like, you can be whoever you want, whatever kind of interests you have. Like, don't feel like you have to choose one or the other. If you're into whitewater rafting, like, you can keep like that. That's really honestly what's brought the most happiness to my life. Even now, like, because when I'm doing stand up now, it's like I'm not making tons of money doing stand up, but it's like I'm just out performing again. Like, design your life. Like we talked about the 4-hour work week. Design your life and think about what makes you happy, and not just like I want to have a lot of money or do this, but like day to day, like the best exercise.
Yeah, like concretely, what makes you happy? Like, what are the moments in your life where you're like, oh, I'm perfectly happy right now? What are you doing when that happens?
Yeah. I love that exercise, the perfect day, where you just write down, like, if you woke up, like, what is your perfect day? You wake up and do what, right? Because it's like, we always fantasize like, oh, I'm on a beach drinking margaritas. It's like, probably not. We think it is. Like, you might be cool for a week, but I promise you, if you were on the beach drinking margaritas for a month straight, you would like never want to do it again. Yeah. Right? Because like you probably, like for me, my perfect day is like kind of, I was like looking back at it, I'm like, it's kind of what I do now. Like I get up, I set, get my kids ready for school. I walk the dog. I, work out. I do some writing. I do this, do that. And it's like the closer you can get day by day to that perfect day, you'll feel that resonance in your life. And so it's not, the goal is really just the journey, as corny as that sounds, right? It's like, your life is your life. And side note, I don't want to say names of the people, but one thing from living in LA, like, is that I got to meet some pretty very, very famous people. And I was struck at like, oh, they're people.
Yeah, they're just a person. That's just a regular person.
They're a regular person. And it's like, still got problems. Hey, you have an Oscar, still got problems. You got $100 billion, still got problems. Doesn't go away. There's never, because on there, I wish I'll tell you offline, but like talking to this person at a party, like I wasn't, it was like a friend of a friend. I was like, hey, how's it going?
No, I don't. I didn't think I did.
Doing all right? And I was like, I grew up watching your movies. Like, you're not happier? You're not got this big house, pretty wife? No? Like, it's like your life is your life. And it's like, it doesn't go away. So it's like, you have to find happiness right now. There is no future happiness, doesn't exist. Now, there might be elements where it's like, hey, man, I'm broke and I'm working or this or that. But like, be happy now, because success without that fulfillment is, it's a little rough to watch, to be honest. It was uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to watch because it's like, and it's a scary thing because it's like, if you do get all the material trappings of success and you're still unhappy, that's where people start to lose their mind. Because it's like, well, I got everything. I did it. It's like, yeah, you're the best. You won. That you won. It's like, so, and I think that's the power of doing, right? The power of having those interests, of seeing life as that continuous series of happy accidents, of being able to find new things. And it's like, who knows, maybe I'll start a YouTube channel or whatever. It's like, it doesn't matter, right? Because it's like, you're just building and each thing can dovetail to the next. So it's like, even if you're not in your ideal place right now, think about, again, like, what are those elements? What do you value? What can you do? And then, so anyway, this is a really cool podcast, guys. It was fun chatting with you guys.
Thank you. Can I ask you one last question?
And then can I ask you two last questions?
Okay. So like lightning round, let's see if we can do this, because I'm honestly not sure we can.
A penultimate question.
Mine's going to be anti-penultimate. I am going to say my question really quickly, and I will encourage you to answer quickly so that we can get like talking like this, like really fast. Like, all right. Okay, ready? Here we go. What was it like in the Peace Corps? How'd you decide to get started? And are you glad you did it? And would you recommend other people do it?
Loved it. It was super fun. I went to the Federated States of Micronesia.
Whoa!
In the middle of the ocean between Hawaii and Japan. Got into it. My mom was actually in the Peace Corps when she was younger. She actually met my dad when she was in the Peace Corps in India. My aunt was in it in Iran as well. It was kind of a family thing. I loved it. I thought it was the coolest thing.
What'd you do there? I
had a library project. That's a weird thing about the Peace Corps is like they get all these kids with no skills like me. I'm like, what am I supposed to be doing here? Like, I have literally nothing to contribute. So it was like kind of I was kind of building this library thing, and I wasn't there super long. For me, it was the comedy that drew me away, but I had a blast. My host family was so cool. The culture was neat. I made great friends there.
Did you do everything in English, or did you learn the local?
Everything was in English. I learned Pohnpeian, which was the language there, decently well, but like, talking to the other volunteers was in English, but yeah, the local language is Pohnpeian. And, it was great. If you want to, if you're interested in that, in living overseas in another culture and doing that, I mean, of course, nowadays you can just have a job and travel to do that kind of thing too.
Yeah.
You don't have to join an organization. But yeah, I loved it. I thought it was great.
Awesome. Okay, I'm done.
My thing. So we're hitting some very super important high concept stuff that is very valuable. I wanted to dive back now into the mundane from something earlier that I don't think we ever totally clarified. I believe that both your work in the company you were with in LA before you moved and started your own webinar concern, that was doing marketing, all that kind of stuff for other companies. Is that right? Like you weren't in-house selling your own stuff. You were working or is it?
The one in LA was a technology company. So it's a software company. So it was all for generating their leads and
for that company. Okay. And then when you left, the company you started was as a third party for to sell other people's stuff. Is that accurate? Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. So I started off doing copywriting, managing Facebook ads, email marketing, and then of course the webinar. So it was just, all for technology.
All technology. Okay. Was that, is that a theme that just worked out? That was kind of the area you're in, or you were intending to work for technology companies?
It's just what I knew. It's just like I knew that market well. So it's like, I know what their workflow is like. Okay. Yeah, there's not really any real plan to it. It just was like, I worked with the company just like yours. I can do this exact thing for you. And it makes it a lot easier in business too, is like, I had one customer that was an artificial intelligence company. So when I talked to somebody else, they're like, oh, you worked with so-and-so? It's like, yeah, okay. All right, you're in, right? It's like, because people aren't creative. Like they want to see that they can solve their specific problem.
Yeah. Makes a ton of sense. And then my last thing is, you already mentioned a couple of things like this, but what are some things that you're working on? You already mentioned your company URL. Is there anything you want to mention, or that where other people who might want to find out more about what you do, whether it's the webinar stuff or the comedian stuff or the podcast stuff or whatever? Can you just mention places people should find you online?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, the webinar company is webinargrow.com. The entertainment blog is indiefreedom.com. You can maybe on LinkedIn or whatever. Trying to think what else is. We have a new video project. It doesn't have a name yet, but it's going to be like software demos. It'd be probably part of Webinar Grow, but it's like software demos, like video marketing that's coming out. Like we're in beta right now with some of it, but it'll be public in a couple months.
Cool. And then surprise bonus question that you can end at any point that you want. What do you see? What would you like to do down the road? You know what I mean? Do you hope to sell a big movie script sometime? Do you just want to keep doing stand up and see what happens, both in the business side and the creative side? Like what would be some aspirations from the likely / reasonable to the, pie in the sky, super optimistic? What would you like to see happen in the future? And how do you think that might happen for you?
Good question. Yeah, definitely continue doing stand up. I definitely need to take my own advice and start producing more video content, even just to have stuff out on YouTube.
Isn't it so much easier to give advice than to?
Oh yeah. Everyone else's problems are so easy.
I know.
Everyone else's problems. I'm like, come on, simple. Dude.
That's like an unwritten bonus of consulting. It's just so easy to coach a person through something.
Oh yeah.
Like it's
when I'm writing my own marketing copy, I'm like, webinars good. Webinars so you good. Like. Right? They're horrible. And then like for other people, I'm like, oh no, you got to change this. Yeah, it's always easier for other people. Yeah, I think aspirationally, this new project is going to hopefully turn into a software play. So I'm looking forward. I think that's it's not total pie in the sky, but it's definitely going to need some work, which I'm excited about, which I'll talk more about once it's out. And then I guess pie in the sky, I don't even know what this would look like, but I would love to work somehow combining storytelling with virtual reality and artificial intelligence, where it's like a more immersive storytelling experience, where it's like, instead of just watching a movie or necessarily playing a game, but and again, we're probably like 20 years away from this technology being at that level, but like being at a level where it's like you could create a story and almost be in it because of how good the technology is, right?
Yeah.
You could remix, like my sort of fantasy story would be like, what if you like could take all of the footage from The Sopranos,
and be a guy in the room.
There's 60 hours of the show, and it's like, what if you could have Tony Soprano's life, but like in Star Wars? Hey, Christopher, were you a Jedi? Tony, I can move stuff with my mind. Tony, Christopher
I feel like I'm
failed.
there right
You know
now.
what I mean? Yeah, right. You could, but you know what I mean? It's like,
I
what
feel
if, you
that would be
could,
amazing. Yeah.
what if you could take all of this stuff that's out there
And just like mix and match kind of.
mix and match it? It's like you could have your own. You could create you could have your own show, and like the AI is advanced enough that it like knows what you're into, or you could even react to it as a game participant. So, I mean, in a perfect world, that's what would be like such a neat thing. I would love to work on. If anybody's out there that's doing Tony Soprano in space, please go. No, I would love to work. I would love to work on something like that. But again, I don't. I have no idea. I have to randomly meet somebody in a bar and have them. I got to tell you about this process.
But that's true. That's generally
Yeah. Go play a game of
That's how I
pool.
do it.
Yeah.
Just bump into people.
All right. Well, I seriously can't thank you enough.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was
My pleasure.
Awesome.
Thanks
This
for
was
having
really
me on.
great. Okay, so obviously a lot of things to unpack there. Thanks again to Kris for sharing his time and his experience and his energy so generously. A lot of stuff came up in this discussion that we've never really addressed before. Before I get to that, one thing came up that we have addressed a lot, and I'm starting to feel bad about it. And that's the whole like field of the practice of the law. Like, I want to say,
it's really taken a beating.
it really has. And obviously, for those who may not know, I dropped out of law school. Not my proudest moment in some ways, actually among my proudest moments in other ways.
I kind of thought of it as one of your proudest moments.
Right. Yeah. And that's partly because there's a lot of layers to something like dropping out of law school, at least for me there were. And also because, I don't know how proud all my other moments are by comparison anyway.
Yeah.
So
The competition is
right.
minimal.
So those are some, but no, I want to be very clear that there are obviously a lot of people out there who are lawyers who enjoy it and like, they wouldn't stop being it, or, they enjoy being lawyers. It happens to be the case that many of the people that we've spoken to kind of came up at a time where, as Kris said, it was sort of like if you didn't know what you wanted to do and you like weren't super great at numbers, or you didn't think that you didn't want to go into like math or science or whatever, then lawyer was sort of the thing that everyone just told you that you should go do. And, I came up sort of at a time like that. Kris is my age and he did as well. And so what happens when you have that kind of, or at least what happened in this case, when you have that kind of like profession by default, or that sort of idea of like, you just kind of fall into this thing. A lot of times you get into that thing eventually and you realize, oh, like it was sort of silly to just think that I could take on this whole calling without actually having it like be a calling for me. And then you stop being a lawyer, or you drop out of law school, or whatever the case might be. Or in Kris's case, you just don't go. And I also, like Kris, I had sort of an image in my head of what lawyers could be, that they would, always walk around in suits and stuff, and they always knew like how best to deal with whatever problem. And obviously I walk around in suits now all the time, so that was a perfect fit. Just kidding. But there was something about what I thought the image was, and also apparently for Kris, a similar kind of a thing. And it was just a completely made up image. It was an image from TV shows and, and all those kinds of things. So what I wanted to say, I kind of lost my train of thought there. But what I wanted to say is I'm going to commit right now that I'm going to go out and find a lawyer who likes being a lawyer, who's going to come talk to us about it, because I want to be really clear that obviously there are those people. And it just happens to be the case that many of the people that we've spoken to so far were in that kind of category of, oh, maybe I'll do this. And then that's not really a good reason to go in most cases for most people.
I think also, like what you were saying, the idea of being a lawyer was something, probably still is to an extent, certainly was, as you said, when you were at that phase of life, something that kind of had like a spotlight on it in media, with counselors, as like there's an image there that, for like the combination of both having a lot of focus on it and having the depiction of it being not quite accurate, or at least not quite complete at the very least, tended to create this problem. If you were going to go into engineering or medicine, I think a lot of people have more of a sense of the subject areas involved in that, and more of a sense of And even that is still hard to really know if you're going to like it until you get into that world. But more so with lawyer, the idea of like the hours involved and the lots of reading and lots of dealing with people going through difficult things all the time. I think that just doesn't really hit you when you're, in Kris's position. You've been to college, you kind of have this vague sense of it, and that there might have been more of these instances of a person who just thinks, yeah, I'll be a lawyer, with a more incorrect idea of what that would be than most people going into most fields. And then you have more of these stories of, I thought I was going to be a lawyer, then boy, did I hate every part of law school or right. Whatever,
Now, I would add too, just not that this super matters, but just to sort of, if this resonates with anybody out there, I did end up really enjoying the academic side of the law, and I love seeing legal questions like play out in real life. I find it all fascinating, but there's a difference between finding it academically fascinating and then being a practicing attorney. And nothing wrong with being a practicing attorney, but that part was something that I personally did not find as fascinating. So for me, there are options where you can be in the legal field and not be a practicing attorney, or at least not be a litigator. You can do all kinds of things. You can be a law librarian, which is actually a really interesting field as well that I did not know existed until I went to law school. So there's all kinds of things out there. I don't want to make it sound like I hate the law or I don't think lawyers should exist or anything. Like I worry that I come across, because for me, dropping out of law school was such a momentous moment. That's a dumb thing to say.
Unlike other moments, this one was momentous.
Right? This moment was momentarily
it
momentous.
Had the qualities
a lot of momentum.
Of a moment.
This moment. No, but it was a big traumatic and dramatic kind of thing for me. And I have some deep-seated issues surrounding it. So whenever the topic comes up, I worry that I'm a little bit too negative about it. And a lot of other people, who maybe in Kris's position or a similar kind of position, it's a field that people make jokes about a lot. And I worry that all that kind of like piles on itself and gives the impression that no one should go to law school, or that any kind of negative thing like that. And that's 100% not what I mean to say. Just like I would not have been a good veterinarian, I would not have been a good lawyer. If I had gone to vet school, I would have dropped out of that too, I'm pretty sure, because I would have gotten like a couple of years into it and been like, oh, I'm really bad at, dealing with animals or whatever. So it was just that. It was just that it was not a fit for me. We've interviewed a lot of people who considered it because it's a very popular field, and they decided it wasn't a fit for them. And I want to be clear that, again, while the field takes kind of a beating so far in our interviews, it is a 100% valid, rewarding field where you can be of tremendous service to your fellow human beings. And yeah, if you were thinking of going to law school, I hope that all of this will not be the reason why you don't go. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, but it could be a very good reason for whether you're interested in the law or any field at all, which is something also that came up in this interview as a general concept, that whatever it is you want to do, figure out a way to do something like that, close to that.
Some version of it as a way that you can try it out.
Yeah. And it might be, if you are in high school, some of our listeners are in high school, some are in college, some have graduated from college, there's all different a spectrum of ages. But even I could imagine if you're in high school, you might think, well, what can I do that's like being a lawyer? I didn't go to law school. I don't have any experience. That's not a reasonable, piece of advice. But you can look around. You can, as we've talked about before, you can ask on social media whether somebody's a friend of yours has a parent or a cousin or whoever who's a lawyer, who you might be able to get in touch with. You could talk to them. You could find out from them if there's an opportunity to be an intern, to shadow them for a day. I mean, it's one thing if you say to yourself, well, I asked everybody I know. I don't know a single person who knows a person who knows a person who knows a lawyer, which is probably not the case. If you go through all that and you can't find anything, okay, then maybe it didn't work out and you checked into it. But most people who sit here, who hear this and think, well, I can't do anything related to that, probably haven't actually looked into it yet. And you're likely to be surprised. A lot of times until you ask these questions and kind of put it out there for a little while, hey, do you know somebody who's works in the law that I could talk to, or maybe, find out about opportunities I could participate in at this point in my life. Till you do that, you don't know what's out there, and you're very likely to find out that, you can do something. I believe Kris mentioned interning at a courthouse or something. and it was not great for him, as a personal fit. It just didn't work. So whatever field you want to go into, you can get a little creative, ask around, find something to just give you a little sneak peek. And if it's the medical field, you can't perform surgeries, but you can volunteer at a hospital. Just physically being in the building where this sort of thing happens can give you a little bit of insight into what that world might be like. And you might meet somebody who could give you further insight. So
I was just going to say another thing that you can do if you maybe don't have the time to try shadowing, or you're hesitant to try that yet or whatever, especially in the field of law, you can go read legal decisions in various cases. Whenever the Supreme Court issues a ruling, obviously there are ways that you can go read the actual ruling. I will caution you that if you don't have any legal training, it will make almost no sense to you, but you'll start to see that the practice of law, like the actual execution of the law, is perhaps not how it seems to be on TV. For me, obviously, I don't know every single field and how it really is, but I would have a hard time imagining that there's another profession out there that is misrepresented more heavily, than being a practicing attorney in whatever field. So you can go on Twitter and read in any profession. You can read the tweets of the people who are practicing that profession and interacting with each other, asking each other questions. One of the really interesting things, sort of an example of that, was when the pandemic was kind of ramping up and spreading to the West. All of these, what they call medical Twitter accounts, Twitter accounts of people who are in the medical fields and who discuss medicine. Yeah. Well,
wait, what's medical Twitter?
Medical Twitter. Yeah. It's, well, whatever. Anyway, a lot of medical Twitter accounts were discussing the symptoms and the logistical challenges that were being posed, in certain hospitals in certain areas and so on. And I don't want to make it sound like if you read those interactions, you would suddenly know as much about it as a doctor would. Obviously, that's not the case, but it gives you a firsthand sort of behind the curtains look at some aspect of what it's actually like to practice that profession in that particular situation. And there's also obviously legal Twitter and education Twitter and every kind of Twitter. I mean, to be clear, they're all still on Twitter, but little areas of Twitter that you can go on. I don't think I've ever said Twitter so many times in such a short amount of time. Whatever. The point of all of this was, I'm going to go out and try to find a lawyer to come in here and talk to us about how much they love
set the record straight
field. Exactly.
Yeah.
So that was the first thing I wanted to say. Patrick, would you like to talk about a thing from Chris's?
That was the first thing. We each have several things. That was 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Although we did touch on some other stuff. Yes, there are many, many things. But I will try to pick out the big ones. I really like when Kris was talking about how when he looks back, a lot of the big moments in his career and I guess in his life more broadly are moments where he was like, I think I could do that. It wasn't like this shining, swelling orchestral score. It's a lot less about that kind of certainty and confidence and more it makes sense that, if you're imagining some future successful version of yourself, however you define that, one of two things is true. Either the exact skill set you have right now is going to get you there, which might be the case. I don't know, what that is. Or you're going to have more skills between now and then that you'll develop, which means there will be moments where you'll try something that you have not successfully done before that you think you can do, but you're not sure, and that's these kind of moments where someone says to you, oh, could you handle this responsibility? Could you solve this problem? And you're not going to know for sure because you haven't done it. And you'll say either, no, I don't feel comfortable, which is a possibility, or yeah, I think I could maybe do that. And the way Kris pointed that out, I think that is such a common theme for a lot of people. Certainly when we spoke with Mark Jakewith, who's a big time WordPress developer, that's kind of the nature of his field. As these pieces of software evolve, they do things that they haven't done yet, and nobody's really sure if they can work them out, but based on their skills, they have a sense that they probably can. So that's a very common way to feel. It's very different from academic situations where, you usually can go into some kind of test having studied whatever it was and with some level of confidence that you should be able to handle everything that comes up because you've seen it already. Once you leave the education world and get into the working world, then that kind of certainty tends to go away, and you tend to find these situations where you have a chance to do something you aren't sure of, and a common theme is that the people who we talk to who have success in these fields kind of embrace those opportunities and get comfortable with that bit of discomfort. If they feel justified, feel like, some level of confidence based on what they've done so far.
Yeah. And to be clear, I think it's true for everyone who has that sort of mindset of, okay, I'll just give this a shot and see what happens, because I have that mindset, and Patrick, you do as well. Sometimes you're going to say, yeah, I think I can do that. And then you turn out to be wrong and you can't do it.
That is a possible outcome.
Right. That absolutely happens. And it kind of goes back to an idea that's come up a few times in our talks, which is that in our opinion, and in the opinions of many successful people, not just the ones that we've spoken with, failure is not just something that you shouldn't be afraid of. It's something that you should actively embrace. If you've never failed at anything, then there's a really good chance that you have not lived up to your potential either. And there's a variety of reasons why that's the case. But whenever you hear from successful CEOs or performers or athletes or whatever, anybody who is a top performer in a field has many, many stories about the time that they failed. There's an old saying in the martial arts that the master has tried and failed more times than the beginner has tried. And that's obviously the master also has times when he tried and did not fail, which is the idea.
One hopes.
Right. The key concept there is that you will not achieve your ultimate potential or anywhere near it if you are afraid to make a mistake. If you're so afraid of making a mistake that you won't let yourself do it, then you also will not go on to whatever you might have gone on to.
Which is such a crazy disconnect between education and I want to think of a phrase besides the real world. It's such an easy, I think it's instantly understood. The world that you're in now is also real if you're in education, if you're in your education years. But the post-education world versus the education world, Kris mentioned this, if you have a big project at school, you get your grade and it is what it is, and then you move on. In the working world, you do some kind of a presentation or whatever, and usually if you're new to whatever you're doing, it might not be very good at first. Most of our guests have described a situation like that, like Mike was just saying, and then you work on those skills, and it's just a different kind of a framework. Usually in school, it's, learn this set of things and move on. It can be frustrating to be in the position we're in, where we're training people who have been in the academic world and are trying to move forward. And it's just such a big gap between the way those things work. And it tends to come up a lot. So I just want to point that out again.
Yeah. I wanted to add, kind of along those lines. I was at a conference, Patrick, I don't remember if you were there. I don't think that you were there, at least not for this talk. And it was someone from the College Board, if I remember correctly. And she was exploring the idea, I forget the term for it right now, the technical term for it, but it was basically a type of test that never ended. It was constant evaluation or some kind of thing like that. And that's not the name of it. But the idea was, rather than have how most curricula are set up now, I think maybe all of them are set up this way, where, there's a period of instruction and practice, and then there's a quiz or a test or a final exam or a project or whatever. And there's these, in that kind of model, there's these punctuation moments of when you're evaluating the student, giving them a grade or a score, and then those scores, are added up and averaged over time, and that's your grade for the semester or the year or whatever. So that's again, the standard model. The idea in this talk was it's possible now to measure so many things about the ways that students interact with teachers and with each other and with texts and whatever. There's so many ways to measure that what if you could get rid of the exams themselves and just constantly always be measuring, how the student is absorbing what they read, how they are interacting with their peers, are they contributing in a meaningful way to discussions and all this. And there would be basically artificial intelligence and algorithms and those kinds of things to weigh all that out and be able to rank all the students basically and say, this is the one who contributes the most to discussions according to the way we measure it. And this is the one who, whatever. And I was oh, that's kind of an interesting idea. And a teacher next to me, turned, I guess I must have said out loud, interesting or something like that, just because I had never heard of this concept before. And this teacher next to me turned to me and said, as afraid as most of the students are of failure, do you think it's a really good idea if they're just constantly being tested so they can constantly be worried about failure? You think any of them are going to
every moment
try anything or learn anything or hazard again? And I was oh no, that would be awful.
Right.
That would be really, really bad.
Yeah. And that's the issue that pops up in education is this just terrifying stigma against failure because it is so final in that setting. It's, we spent this few weeks learning this. It's too bad you didn't really do great on the final test, and we moved on. Whereas in the working world, it's, well, you have that same kind of assignment again next week. Here's some notes on it. Do better next time. So this idea of failure, I mean, it's gonna happen. You know what I mean? It happens to every single person. The most successful people, as you said, the masters of anything, they have all these stories coming up and being embarrassed and being unprepared. And the issue isn't, when you become successful, it's not that you avoid all those things. It's you endure them like everybody else, and you learn from them, and you're determined to stick with it. Yeah.
Or you get good at hiding it. Just kidding. Don't do that. But I mean,
some people do that.
There are people who do that.
I'm not going to recommend that. It is an option, but yeah. Another big thing that Kris mentioned that I thought was, when he mentioned, I never heard the phrase action faking before. And I was like, it's one of those things you hear and you're like, I do that. I know people who do that. It's this thing, like, you want to feel productive. And especially if you are in more of an entrepreneurial setting, you're more in charge of your own time. It can be difficult. This is a thing that you don't really know about. I mean, Mike and I are, I guess, entrepreneurs or whatever. We're in charge of ourselves. We don't have bosses besides each other, I guess, that we answer to. So it can be paralyzing sometimes when you're the one deciding what you work on each day. And you can sometimes, you find yourself kind of, your brain is like, if we spent the morning doing this, that'll be good. And then sometimes those tasks don't really lead to anything, or 20 minutes of that would be good, but you do it for 3 hours and you look back on it, and it's easy to kind of not realize that you've hit the peak of the value there, and you should move on to something that's actually doing something. And Kris talked about, get to the actual customer person who needs what you want, stay focused on that as a kind of a guiding force of, like, how to do something that actually counts.
Yeah. Like, do something real that actually collides with reality and other people in some kind of way, and then work from there. I would add, though, this is one of those situations, and there's actually another one that Kris mentioned that I wanted to dig into a little bit later, but it's one of those situations where action faking, for example, is definitely something you don't want to be doing. It's not a good habit to have. On the other hand, if you react to that fact by saying, okay, I'm not going to do fake actions, I'm not going to do meaningless things, I'm only going to make sure that what I'm doing is really going to get me to where I'm going. The danger with that is you might overanalyze and overthink where your actions could lead, or what the possible ramifications of a particular thing might be if you did this or that or whatever. And that leads to not doing anything. That's paralysis by analysis, that kind of trap as well. So I fully agree. And I think if Kris were here, he would agree, that that's not the analysis paralysis thing is not the correct solution to action faking. Like, the real goal should be to take actions that you truly believe are likely to generate positive outcomes or make some kind of meaningful, noticeable difference. Those are the actions that you ought to be taking. Personally, I would err on the side of, if the question is don't take any action, or take an action that you're not sure if it's a good one or not, probably taking some kind of action is better than none in most cases. But again, here, it's very hard to give these blanket rules. I guess a good way to think of it for me is, if you feel that you're action faking, you probably are. If you feel that you're doing something because you're trying to avoid some other thing. There's actually a really, really good series of books by a writer named Stephen Pressfield, who I can't recommend his stuff highly enough. It's really, really good. And one of the things that he says is, so he talks about this principle called resistance, which he believes is this impersonal, universal force that specifically tries to keep you from doing the best that you can do in whatever field you're in. And he says that resistance has certain universal properties. And one of those properties is that it's kind of, how's he put it? Basically, you can use the thing that you feel the most resistance towards to know that whatever that thing is, that's the thing you really need to be doing. So, he's often speaking from the standpoint,
the target that's hardest to hit, kind of, or the destination that's hardest to approach, kind of.
Yeah. So if you're a common thing people will do is they'll say, okay, I should be working on whatever project. But the dishes need doing. Well, I don't like doing the dishes, but let me get that out of the way, and you'll do the dishes, and then you'll do laundry or whatever. I'm speaking from experience here. But the level of resistance against doing the dishes, you're nobody likes doing them probably. So, but whatever. But that's not as strong an amount of resistance as the thing that actually you need to sit down and do.
Yeah.
And so what Pressfield is saying there, I think, is whatever you feel like sort of
pushing you away the most. Yeah.
Yeah. Like the thing that needs doing, but that you really very much don't want to do the most. Like that's probably the thing that needs doing the most.
I've never heard this before. This is excellent content.
Yeah, no, it's really good.
This is my mind is expanding. I'm sitting here going, oh, wow, that is such a useful like guiding principle that really.
Yeah, all of his stuff is really, really good. But yeah, the guy has written a ton of books and movies that you would know. But it took him decades to get to the point where he could actually like reliably churn stuff out. And then he kind of looked back on all of that and he sort of digested it and kind of presented, ways to learn from his mistakes. And the books are fantastic. So The War of Art is, I think, like the first one of the like how-to books. Do the Work is another good one. They're all really, really good. Can't recommend them highly enough.
I wonder if he did those books instead of writing another screenplay, because that would have been like too challenging. I gotta work on my War of Art book. Yeah. Yeah. That actually, though, that's really fascinating. And I think, like you said, it's less a hard and fast rule and more just a thing to check in with yourself on. If you feel like, I've been working on this for a while, like how connected is this? Yeah. And
you can't
also,
lie to
if
yourself.
You know there's another thing that you need to do and you're not doing it,
right.
Like Mike's saying, this concept, which I think is a really, really good guiding principle.
Yeah.
You kind of want to be honest with yourself and say, all right, I need to face this other challenge. Anyway.
I was just going to say, while we're on the topic of those kinds of principles, Kris put forward another one that I think is also a really, really good and really powerful idea. But I worried after when I was kind of like mentally processing everything that we went over, I worried that it might be taken in the wrong way. Or I'll put it this way. I know that I often take it the wrong way. And when I was in high school and college, like I only took it the wrong way. And that was the idea of being happy now, and Kris was saying, and I think what Kris was saying, if I remember correctly, was, if you imagine that you need to go through some kind of career or some sort of set of challenges because in your head, like the status of having done that or something is important, or you want to be like basically what Kris wanted to be when he just wanted to like be an international lawyer, jet around and like wear a suit, like, all that stuff.
Vague idea of a successful, important person. Yeah.
Right. And he kind of wanted those things, the trappings of that position more than he actually wanted to do whatever an international lawyer does on a day-to-day basis. Again, a very vague concept. And for a lot of us, I think, or at least again for me, I know I've had those kinds of issues as well, where you think that you get like interested in what you imagine the glory of a certain thing to be, or the prestige, or the challenges, or whatever. Like you get sort of stuck on those things rather than asking yourself, like, do I actually even want to do this? Like, is this something I'm happy to be doing? And so he was talking in that sense about like being happy now, or at least that's how I took it. And I think that, again, that's a really good idea. I don't think it's a great thing to postpone joy in every single, sense. But the danger of taking a statement like be happy now too much to heart is that another way to interpret be happy now is, well, don't do any work today. Just sit and watch TV, take a nap, do any of those kinds of things. Like
instant gratification, sort of,
right,
and live for the moment, there's no tomorrow kind of life.
Right, exactly. And that's the way that I've taken be happy now a lot of times. Yeah. And it's not a great thing to do.
I had 20 years of that, which were pretty good. Right. But not sustainable.
No, they were, but
20 good years. No,
yeah. But one of the problems with like instant gratification, in the moment, in the instant, it's wonderful because you're being gratified. But
one instant later,
right. Well, and it eventually burns out. Eventually you deplete whatever resources you might have had in terms of time, money, energy, opportunity, youth, like any of those kinds of things. If you just sit and relax and be happy now, like in the most like hedonistic, like self-serving kind of way to be happy now, you will eventually reach a point where you can't anymore, like for various reasons. Nothing stays the same. Stuff in your life will change. You will change. And that set of things that you were doing is not going to make you happy anymore. Getting a little bit deeper into this, and this is kind of where I wanted to go. I'm not going to I'm not going to say anything new about happiness that hasn't been already said by philosophers and psychologists and researchers and writers and everything else. But I do want to put some ideas out very quickly. First of all, the type of happiness that comes from watching a lot of TV or doing any other kind of like leisure activity endlessly that's not really actual happiness. What that is, actually, and this is an idea from Stephen Pressfield too, that's incapacity. It's you making yourself unable to function so that you can ignore the fact that whatever your calling is, whatever your thing is that you're supposed to do and be and like do in the world, whatever that is, you don't have to do it while you're just watching TV or mindlessly doing whatever. And that's why people call it being mindless. Like you are finding some kind of way to turn off your mind. And that isn't actual happiness. Happiness in the way that I would encourage people to think of it is like an active state of knowing what's going on and being happy about it, as opposed to just ignoring reality or finding some kind of way to put off all of your concerns. One other thing to sort of add to that is there's another philosophy or school of thought or whatever you want to call it, which talks about the idea, like at the opposite end of the extreme of being happy now would be the opposite extreme of not being happy now, only working now, and storing up all of your potential happiness for later. Something I would also not recommend personally that you do for a variety of reasons, which you can probably imagine if you think about it. So I'm not saying that the other extreme is better either. I personally hold to the opinion that in general, every day you will be happier if there is some part of the day that you've invested in the future. If you sacrifice some part of a day now and every day so that in the future you can be perhaps healthier, if you're sacrificing by exercising, perhaps wealthier if you're just investing money, sacrificing whatever you could be spending now so that you can put it away somewhere, or working on relationships, working on projects, working on whatever it might be, your days will generally be happier, like actually overall happier if you do that. At least that's been my experience. And that's not an idea that I made up. Like that's an idea I got from lots of other people. It was their experience too. And then finally, though, there's another way to, not finally, we can talk about this literally for years, but
to wrap this up once and for all.
Right, and to solve once and for all the question of human happiness.
Here it comes.
On this podcast hosted by two idiot brothers.
Yeah.
Here's the right. But the final thing that I wanted to say about it now, there's another way to take Kris's statement, or again, like it's not his rule either, be happy now, like he didn't make that up, but there's another way to take that philosophy, which may be more in keeping with what Kris was saying. And it's sort of an unpopular opinion. So I'm going to say this very carefully to make sure that I'm not overstating or stating it in a way that I don't mean. But there is some extent to which being happy in the moment can be a choice. And obviously you can point to a lot of people who are living through horrible things. And you might ask, like, Mike, are you saying that person should be happy while they're in the middle of blah, blah, blah? No, I'm not saying that that it's always an easy choice to make or that it's always a choice that you can make. But there are a lot of scenarios in which you could choose to engage with the situation in a way that is positive, reflective, open, that could lead to new opportunities, even if you don't like the thing that's going on at the moment, in a way where you could be grateful for opportunities that you've already had. There's that kind of way to engage in a lot of situations, especially work challenges. And in that sense, you can choose to be happy now, but that's not the incapacitated, fake happiness. That's the actual happiness of, oh, I'm so grateful and energized to be in this moment now, even though it's challenging, even though it's hard. It gives me the chance to learn more or do more or turn a situation around or seize a new opportunity or meet new people, whatever it might be. And again, I want to be very clear. I'm not saying everyone can just snap their fingers and be super happy all the time, no matter what they're doing. That's obviously not true. But you can also choose to make yourself miserable in certain situations. Something I've done a lot. That's how I know you can do it.
Yeah.
And,
definitely do.
And you can, in many ways, just sort of opt not to do that or opt to try to do it less, at least in the beginning. So there's lots of different ways to interpret the phrase "be happy now." But again, knowing how I would have interpreted that decades ago is just, enjoy today and don't worry about tomorrow. I don't think that's what Kris was saying. And whether he was saying it or not, which again, I don't think he was, I would say don't do that. Patrick, I don't know what your thoughts are. I kind of went on a bit of a monologue there. Sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, a couple of thoughts. One thing that your statement about there are situations for some people in some situations more than I think most people realize where you might just be in kind of a bad mood in a sort of ordinary day kind of way. Again, obviously this does not apply if you're going through something exceptionally difficult or something like that. But for a lot of people in a lot of situations, the way that you approach something and the mindset that you have and what you choose to focus on can absolutely have a huge impact on the happiness that you are experiencing. One thing that I often do, I guess, or try to keep in mind, I guess, in that kind of situation, if it is sort of an ordinary day, but you're not like in the best mood or whatever, I think like, what if I had a loved one who, was sick or injured or something, and I had just gotten the news that they hadn't really gotten hurt, or they were all better, or some bad outcome had been avoided, or what if my fridge broke or something, but it's working again and it's fine, I don't have to deal with that. You know what I mean? A situation where like everything in this moment is the same. Everybody, all my appliances are functioning, like my loved ones are not injured or sick or whatever. All that is the same, but like I would be so much more aware of it if I had just thought that I had lost it. You know what I mean? For a second. And it's I don't know if that was coherent or not, but the idea that like the status quo is easy to take for granted. And often we remember that when the status quo goes bad, some little detail that we don't think of is suddenly, not okay, possibly in a very serious way. At any given moment when that's not happening, you can kind of remind yourself what that feels like and just how overwhelmingly grateful and happy and exhilarated you would be. And the whole day wouldn't matter what happened. You'd be so happy, if you had actually been possibly going through one of these difficult situations and then suddenly everything was just back to just normal, nothing exceptionally good, but nothing bad happening. And that's not always the case. Sometimes people are dealing with something very difficult, and I know that exercise isn't helpful then, but a lot of times it can be.
I think another thing too that kind of brings up is, and these are important things, I think very important things when you're thinking about like what kind of career you might want to follow, or what kind of school or educational path you might want to take, or any of those things. There's a lot of things that can contribute to you being happy. Actually, Patrick and I are big fans of a book that I can't remember the name of right now. Solving for Happy. Is that what it's called?
Oh, Solve for Happy, I think.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. Some version of the word solve, and then the word for, and then the word happy.
Yeah.
And that guy, it's written by an engineer, and it's a very smart engineer. And it's basically, he realized that he was unhappy despite the fact that he had a lot of the possessions and status and stuff that he had assumed was going to make him happy when he was younger. He still wasn't happy. And he decided to view his unhappiness as like an engineering problem to be solved. He said, my unhappiness is basically like a physical state within my brain. There's chemicals or something in my brain that I don't want. It's creating a state in my head that I don't like. How can I change that? As though you would say like, okay, we're building this building and there's too many like shearing forces on this one area of the building. How can we like mitigate those forces? It was the same kind of like, let's pretend this is a physical thing, or it is a physical thing, and let's find a way not to be so unhappy. And then he goes on to define happiness in a lot of senses. I would advise anyone to listen to this book if they like being happy, which probably most. Anyway, one of the things that he says is that happiness is the default human state. If you take a child or some other person who, for whatever reason, is not like weighed down by societal concerns and self-reflection and those kinds of things, that child will be happy. Like objectively, like from the outside, they look like a happy little thing. They run around, they play with stuff. They could play with a rock or with a $10,000 toy, exactly the same, because to them, again, happiness is the default state. So with that in mind, what are the things that help you reach that default state of happiness? What are the things that help you unclutter whatever emotional response you're having to something, that's causing you to feel unhappy? For me, just to give an example of the kinds of things that it is, like this is going to sound dumb, comfortable shoes, not like expensive shoes. I want to be very clear, but just when my feet are in something that feels, like that's a really nice feeling. And, having coffee and this ties into something else, which I wanted to mention about what Kris said, but having coffee like inside a very cozy like house or a cafe or someone's kitchen when it's snowing or pouring rain outside, and having nowhere to be for a few hours and just like talking with somebody who I find interesting. Literally can't think of anything better than that. And that sounds maybe dumb, but I mean it. Like that's, you can't take that from me. That's my favorite thing to do. Yeah. And it's going to be different for everybody, obviously. But what you will often find, I think, from people that I've discussed this kind of thing with and from these books and so on, there are certainly people who can find that kind of happiness in their work. But for a lot of people, the career that you choose is sort of incidental to the actual happiness. And there's other benefits from work besides making you happy. There's having a body of work that you can look back on and be proud. There's knowing that you helped people if that's what you're into, knowing that you took on a challenge and solved it. There's a million ways that you can get satisfaction from your work that are not related to whether you're happy or not. But if one of the things that you think you would like to be in your adult life is happy, then I would encourage you to start thinking now about what that actually means to you. It may not mean that you have a ton of money and a ton of influence and a ton of followers or something, or it might mean that. I mean, it's up to you to decide. But I think a lot of times, and this is also to a point that Kris made earlier, a lot of times before you have those kinds of things, you assume that once you have them, everything's going to be great. And then many people who do have them report that it's not so great. So, it's just something to keep in mind.
Yeah. The other thought I had on this topic, the idea of being happy now, I feel like is if you are pursuing a career, as Mike thought he was when he was in law school, if the path to the thing that you want to do is grueling in a way that you hate and isn't fulfilling and you're not motivated to continue it, like I had a friend who went to accounting school, some kind of like advanced accounting school, and like the day he graduated, he realized like, I hate accounting. It hit him that the stuff he'd been doing for years, which he never liked, was now going to be his career. So like if you have this vision of yourself in the future where you're going to be happy and then your whole path between here and there makes you miserable, probably that whole path between here and there is what you're going to be doing more of once you get there. So if you're unhappy now pursuing the thing that you think will make you happy later on, then that's a bad sign, and being happy now can also mean the way of adjusting the path that you're on to find something that is a better fit. And, if you're going to, we spoke to Dr. David Khadrazadi in our second episode, and he talked about med school being challenging, but it was in a fulfilling, like engaging way that he wanted to stick with. I'm not saying anything challenging means change your path, but if it's challenging and you hate it, and you just don't see any joy in it. We spoke with Brianne Williams, who did nursing stuff for a while in high school and into college, and just was getting kind of hit in the face every day with how much she didn't like it. It just wasn't a good fit for her. And so if being happy now is a challenge because what you're pursuing, like the path to get there, is just not fulfilling or interesting or engaging, and you just find yourself feeling sort of trapped and desperate and wanting something else, then that's a great example of like, it might have felt like whatever sort of status or lifestyle you were going to have at the end of this road was going to be the payoff, but you're just absolutely miserable until then. It's more likely that once you get there, you're still going to be miserable and realize that you wasted all this time on something that you don't even actually want or like. And that's a time to try to reevaluate, and decide, is this the kind of challenge that is fulfilling? Like when Mike was talking about different kinds of happiness, I was thinking one way I like to think of it, that sort of long-term happiness is like fulfillment, that short-term watch TV, eat junk food kind of thing isn't fulfilling in general. It's enjoyable. It can be, for sure, but it's not something that lasts and it's not fulfilling. So if you can find a fulfilling challenge, that's a great starting point, even if you're not really sure exactly where to go from there. I think that's a good way to maybe approach it.
One of the things in that Solving for Happiness, or whatever it's actually called, one of the things in that book that really, I remember I was listening to that audiobook when I was in the gym. This was back when you could go to the gym.
Yeah.
And I was in the middle of an incline bench press set. I recall this. And, and the guy mentioned, or stated, like on the way to proving something else, he was like, fun is not happiness. They're not the same thing. And I was like, oh my God, I've been living my whole life as though fun and happiness are the same thing.
It's like a one sentence hits you and you go, and I dropped the weight on my neck. And everything came crashing down around me. Yeah.
And I was like, this is neither fun nor happy. No. But yeah, and that's, those are the kinds of insightful moments. The next talk that we did, the Patrick and I have not recorded the recap of yet. It had two moments where the person we were interviewing said like just one little like pithy, like one sentence thing. And the hair on my arms literally stood up. part of my brain was like, oh, that's like a universal message you need to know. Fun not being happiness is one of those things. Unless for you, it is the same thing, which is great.
They can overlap, they can coincide, but the one does not necessarily.
But by default, when a person is having fun, it doesn't necessarily mean that that person is going to be happier in the long run. Anyway, so lots of things to say about that. I have one other thing that's kind of on the same topic. Do you mind if I just keep dominating this part of the podcast?
Dominate it. Go nuts.
Sorry. So a thing that can dramatically affect a person's happiness more than I think a lot of people realize, or what I'm trying to say is there was that moment where Kris mentioned that he's not brought to tears by like any of the standard human things that bring someone to tears. But when he was in his new hometown,
Boise,
driving around, he was just like reduced to tears by how happy it made him.
Yeah.
There's such a heavy impact, like the place where you are. And that can be meant in a lot of ways. It can be the geographical location. It can be the type of building, your living situation, the type of room, that you sleep in. It can be place relative to other people that you love, are you near your family or far away from your family if you don't, love them or whatever. Like the place where you are has such an impact or can have such an outsized impact on how happy you are or just how easy you find it to get happy and stay happy and feel happy and all that stuff. And I think we often overlook it. I think it's also true, like if you were some kind of master of meditation or something, it wouldn't matter where you were. You could be just as happy, like in Kung Fu Panda, when they're talking about like the dragon warrior, like the ultimate embodiment of Kung Fu. And I don't think they actually say it doesn't matter where he is, but they're giving this idea that like wherever that embodiment is, like he's fine. He can sustain himself infinitely on almost no food. He can face any challenge. He can do all these things. I'm sure it's true that if you have a sufficient level of happiness from other sources, then it doesn't probably matter where you are. But it's also true that if you really like being around the beach or something and you never get to see a beach, that weighs on you. If you really love being in a snowy mountainside, kind of setting and you never get to do that, it weighs on you. If you want to see greenery and foliage and you live in a concrete jungle, or the other way around, I really love being in big cities myself. And when I'm not in a big city, like it weighs on me. And I think it's okay to acknowledge that. I think I'll never forget, like I was taking Russian when I was in college. And I remember the professor, she was trying to like elicit a conversation from the class. And she would often do that by asking us questions about like why Americans like did a particular thing differently from how Russians did it, or, why did we think Russians did it differently? Just cultural stuff, because obviously that plays into language a lot. And one of the questions she asked was, why do Americans think it's okay to move so much? And I was like, what are you talking about? She's like, well, everyone in this room, like if you've moved at least once in your life, raise your hand. And we all raised our hands because like we've all done that, or like everyone in the room had. And she was like, I've never moved. No one in my family has ever moved. No one that I know has ever moved. Like they all can trace their lineages like back to, in some cases, the same building, like the same apartment building.
Wow.
But they can all trace themselves back to the same like area of Moscow, basically as far back as they can trace themselves. And,
wow.
And so her point was, she's like, if I were to move, it would be like my life would be over. Like, it'd be like a death almost. Like I wouldn't have the people I've grown up with. I wouldn't have the places that I know, like the stores I always go into, the high school that I went to, it's like all of, she's like listing off these things that were very meaningful to her.
This is paralyzing me emotionally, by the
way. You're welcome.
Side note.
Yeah. I've been thinking some of these conversations are getting pretty real. Like, I don't know.
I guess if you talk long enough, which we have.
Well, all this stuff started out like, what's it like to be a doctor? What's it like to do that? And that's important. But
what's it like to never be happy?
Right. Why don't you feel tied to any institution you've ever been?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. But she was being serious. It wasn't like I hope I'm not making it sound like a Russia's better than America thing. It wasn't that at all. Many of her questions were about ways that she thought America was better. But this particular one, why do Americans move all the time? It was such a striking thing because nobody in the room thought Americans did move a lot.
Or like,
like it just didn't, I wouldn't want to because I like where I live, but I could very easily pack up and just move somewhere else tomorrow if I thought an opportunity came up somewhere else, or, whatever. Like I would feel annoyed by the need to pack everything and like arrange all of that. But 2 years from now, I wouldn't remember anything about where I live right now, in the same way that like right now, I don't remember much about living in other towns or whatever that I've spent significant amounts of time in. I don't know. It was just kind of interesting. But all that to say, like the place that you're in, when you find a place that's a good fit for you, it, or at least the people I've spoken to a lot of people who've reported this feeling. I know that I've experienced this feeling. It doesn't have to be just like one place. Again, it could also just be a group of friends you like being around, or a loved one, or, a particular type of setting. And maybe there's like millions of places to find that setting throughout the world. But I think there's something very deep and like biological, like a lizard brain level. Like we all have places we like to be and places we don't like to be. And I mean, again, like physical surroundings, whatever. If you're in a place where you don't like to be, you might be surprised how much changing that could make a difference. Although, again, on the topic of contradicting advice, like it's also the case that if you're fully miserable and you move to a different town, unless you make other changes, you're unlikely to stop being fully miserable.
Yeah.
But
like an action faking, avoiding the real problem.
It absolutely can be.
Yeah.
But anyway, I guess where I'm going with all of that is I would strongly encourage people who are thinking about what their careers might look like to consider where they like to be and whether that career allows them to at least spend some of their time in that kind of location, situation, social setting, physical setting, whatever it is.
Also, a quick thing, one thing I thought of when he described that experience driving through Boise and just being brought to tears by how much he liked it. Another aspect of that, aside from specifically where you are, is just like when some aspect of your life isn't quite right and then it like gets right, you can just have that kind of, wow, like this is what I needed. This is how it should have been. This is what, I've been missing. Because if you were just kind of always missing it, he described a life in LA that had its interesting aspects, but not right for him, and that feels like that was a very big part of, maybe he was in a place for a while that was not right, and then he ended up doing the right thing, and then he could just feel it and tell, and it was like this big moment. And
it makes you wonder too, kind of along those lines, like if he had gone straight to where he is now and skipped all that stuff in the middle, would it have meant as much?
Yeah.
Kind of got the sense no, but I mean, who knows? He'd have to answer that, and he's not here right now. But,
yeah.
There are those kinds of considerations as well. I have one last thing I wanted to say about this, and then I will yield the 90% of the time that I've been using. So the final thing I wanted to mention, and there's way more than this, but the final thing that's, I felt super important to mention was something you can kind of see in the interactions with Kris that you also see in in people in other fields. And it was the way, but for Kris, the way it played out was, as he mentioned, like he considers like talking and words and that kind of thing to be an area of strength. He is clearly a student of the arts and performance and film and comedy, TV, all that stuff. He had a wealth of knowledge of the way those kinds of things work. That was very easy and really can't be faked. Like you can kind of tell when somebody knows what they're talking about versus when they don't. And to be clear, he was also saying, like, I haven't been in parts of the industry for a very long time, but this is what I remember, and this is vaguely how it works, and these are people I know who do it, and this is what they say, all that kind of stuff. But when, Kris, like towards the end of the interview, when he kind of went into that bit about if the Sopranos were like set in the Star Wars kind of universe, that was funny, but you could tell, or I think you could tell, Kris, I'm sorry if this isn't true. I think it seemed to be the case that, he's probably done some version of that bit before. Like he had those voices ready, and given that this is his career and profession, or it's a part of his career or one of his careers to do that kind of thing, he was ready with it, kind of had it in his back pocket, so to speak. And it's something that you see from high level performers in a lot of fields. I remember also being struck when I was in Paris for the first time and I went to the Rodin Museum, and I didn't know much about Rodin at all, but like in the museum, walking through it and looking at his works over time, you could see there was like a mass production quality to it. And I don't mean that in a bad way. He would explore like certain themes over and over again. He would reuse certain figures and concepts. And to me, I thought that he was like the only person doing that. I was like, wow, what a genius, like figuring out ways to reuse all these ideas. It turns out that every artist does this. Like that's how really, really dedicated to something, you come back to certain themes and you refine them. Anyway, I could go on with a million examples of this, but the thing I wanted to draw a parallel to is it's actually a type of mental model, like the type of thing that we talked about specifically when we talked to Walker Peak, who is a very accomplished like engineer and entrepreneur. And he had all of these like modeled, like sort of predefined, generalized ways to address problems. Anyway, it just sort of struck me that this kind of thing that like high level performers do, it's a very similar kind of thing. You've run into a problem repeatedly or run into a setup, a situation, a pattern, whatever it is. You've run into it so many times that you know the best ways for you to deal with it. And, and you put that into practice. And it is, again, one of those things that really can't be faked. And it's one way that you can tell when you're working with someone who's put in the 10,000 hours, so to speak, versus someone who hasn't. And it kind of got me thinking also, just a little mini pitch for the Black Books, like the way that those books came to exist is like we tutored a ton of people and we saw the same types of things coming up over and over again. And we realized like, okay, you can, address these certain issues in this kind of way. And these types of questions always have these sorts of things going on and those don't and blah, blah, blah. And it's just the same kind of thing. It's like so much experience with the situation that you abstract it out and then you can find sort of ways to dispose of problems that an amateur or an outsider would have a harder time coming up with a solution for. You've been through it or something like it so many times that you can solve it much more easily. Anyways, maybe like a silly kind of a lesson to pull out of a very good Sopranos in Space impression, but it's something worth keeping in mind. And it also, as a final little like coda to all of this, it shows how, even Kris, someone who is like talented and naturally has a facility with speaking and all of that kind of stuff. Clearly, while he has those things, he has worked hard on refining that to get even better. He mentioned having, coaches, coaching other people, recording stuff that he does when he's on stage and putting work out there and getting feedback on it and all those kinds of things. You can do that too. One of the things we routinely hear from younger people is that they're nervous about speaking or breaking the ice with a potential employer or potential new friend or potential whatever. And something we've discussed in the past, but we never, I think, had such a clear example of how it can be done so well, is the idea that if you want to get better at talking to people, like it's a learnable skill. If you want to get better at doing any kind of art or any kind of particular like problem solving it's learnable. And if you put the time in and focus your energies on it, ideally even finding something maybe that you really, really genuinely love and enjoy dealing with, the more you do that, the more you build up that arsenal, that bag of tricks that you can just sort of pull something out of when you need it. And it will help you solve a problem or help you come up with a funny thing to say or whatever. Anyway, I didn't want to let that go by because I felt like it's a very important and useful thing that a lot of people can put into practice, even if they don't know it. And that is all the things I had written out that I wanted to mention about this interview. Thanks. Patrick, please go ahead.
And now
with your
begin
stuff.
The second hour of this analysis.
Right.
Okay, so here are the end of my things, which here they go. Let me drag this out more by talking about what they're going to be. That moment of him running into the movie star, like top level movie star person, huge career, and just seeing kind of face to face that, oh, this person is not just walking around on cloud nine, every day, just super happy, same stressors, same kind of problems. And it seemed like that was a big moment for him. That kind of ties back to the Be Happy Now thing. He had been trying to make it in comedy and in entertainment, and implied or explicit or whatever was the idea that, if he hit it big, there's some, pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. There's happiness waiting for him. And then to see this other person who did not achieve that, I think it really plays into the Be Happy Now thing where, he was kind of struggling just in the way that you struggle when you want to make it as an entertainer, and having to find other things to do to survive and everything just financially. And then the idea that, he could maybe do all that, all his dreams come true. And then once he gets there, he's just not, any better off than anybody else if he hasn't kind of addressed his other the other problems everybody has. And it's
which
interesting.
Again,
go on.
Oh, sorry. That also it kind of goes back to that thing about happiness being the default state. And if you find ways to like clutter up your mind and your ambitions and whatever, those things don't, like the ambitions in the sense that you haven't earned being happy yet, like that doesn't ever really go away until you kind of make it go away, not by earning something, but by realizing, hey, is that ever going to actually?
Yeah, that status that you're chasing isn't going to resolve all the other things. And I found it interesting that now that he is in Boise, he described, he started doing comedy again recently after not doing it. And I think it's kind of cool. That seems like a great example of the be happy now thing. He seems more to realize that he just likes doing that. I imagine that he wouldn't be upset if he got some kind of big break or big chance based on the comedy he's doing, but he also seems to just really like doing it. He's got his the webinar business and all that, which he's very engaged with and doing very well with. And then he has this sort of other passion pursuit that he's doing, and it's less, it seems to be less the way it was earlier on of, with the end goal of, I'm doing this, I'm enduring this difficulty and this financial hardship so that I can maybe have this huge thing come at the end, and more, I have a sustainable life anyway, and I'm doing this because I like it, and stuff might come from it or might not, and he seems to be in a really good state with that, found like a really good balance. Another thing that was relevant in that same area was, he said he kind of found, I think this was specifically in the entertainment world, but it applies broadly, that talent is just part of it. Having great talent is a chunk of what will lead to your success. As he said, if you have talent, but you feel a little too good for certain opportunities, or you get burned out, or you lose your motivation, or you don't put in consistent work, or whatever, or
you just have terrible luck. I mean, sometimes
that's part of it as well. But he said the people that he saw that really made it, when he kind of really was honest with himself about how that all worked, they were the ones who were always going to whatever the workshops were, and they were always going to the places that were like the right places to go that he didn't really want to go to for one reason or another. It's not enough to feel like, well, I'm really good at this thing, and if I haven't succeeded, then it's because the system is unfair, or because I just have bad luck and there's nothing to be done about it. You could have good luck or bad luck, but if you have what feels like bad luck, but you're also not doing all that other stuff that you kind of need to do to get your talent out there and develop it and refine it and all those other steps, then you're leaving a lot on the table as far as finding out, how well you really could do something or how much you could succeed. Again, this is not just an entertainment context, but any area where a person has talent. Having the talent is great, but it's definitely not sufficient in general for a person to do really well. You have to be prepared to apply that talent, refine it, and put in that other, I think he said probably 80% of the pie is not the talent side, it's the other stuff. So we could, you probably don't believe it, but we could go on more about this, but I think that
I wish we could have spoken to him more about the Peace Corps stuff.
I wish we could have talked about a lot of stuff. I actually do genuinely have more stuff I could say right now. I'm going to just say them to this wall after we stop recording, because nobody should be subjected to that. But you have more.
If only that were a joke.
More ideas. They'll come up another time, I'm sure. Thank you, Kris, so much.
Seriously.
Really, really interesting, really insightful. Covered so many areas. Totally had the whole bonus thing of the entertainment industry world that I secretly or less secretly now really want to just break into one of these days. But
I used to, I remember thinking when I was young, if you had asked me when I was like 10 what I was going to be when I grew up, people did ask, and my answer was, well, I haven't decided between being a famous stand-up comedian or the first baseman for the New York Yankees. Like, those were the two things I was sure.
Time has
I don't know which one, but it's going to be one of those.
Yeah, I've got it narrowed down. Yeah.
Right. Now I know you can do both. No.
Yeah.
But yeah, whatever. Anyways, so, yeah, interesting to speak to someone who has actually gone down at least one of those paths.
Yeah. Thank you, Kris.
Seriously. Yeah. Thank you so much.
So yeah, that's all for now. If you like the show, please take a moment to rate and review us on iTunes or the podcast player of your choice. And of course, if you want to hear more episodes, remember to subscribe as well. You can find our SAT Prep Black Book and ACT Prep Black Book on Amazon.com, and you can find our online video courses on QuestPrep.com. Please tune in for our next episode coming up in a couple of weeks. And in the meantime, feel free to reach out to us on our Quest Prep Facebook page or the Quest Prep YouTube channel. This episode was artisanally hosted by myself, Patrick Barrett, and my brother, Mike Barrett. Our guest was Kris Sharma. Every musical element was created and performed by Parker Hale Hastings. Yak Milk is Pink.
And here's that special segment we promised you on the critical reasons why you should only work with official practice questions published by the company that makes the test you're prepping for. So, as we said earlier in the episode, the single most important resource in your test preparation is not a set of preparation materials made by us, unfortunately, wish that it were, but instead, the single most important thing you actually need is a set of real practice questions from the company that makes your test. So that would be the College Board for the SAT or ACT Inc. if you're taking the ACT. And the reason for this has to do with the fundamental nature of standardized testing. Most people who take the SAT or the ACT never really stop to think about what that fundamental nature is, or what a standardized test is even for, or how the purpose and design of the ACT or the SAT should determine the right strategies to use on those tests. So let's pause for a second and think about those things now. The whole point of a standardized test is to measure the same things every time the test is given, because this consistency allows colleges and universities to have an objective standard that can be applied to all applicants who submit test scores. So if you think about it, a standardized test score is the only objective number that can be part of every student's application, because all the other numbers in the application, like grade point average, class rank, et cetera, those are all heavily affected by each student's unique school, teachers, and course load. In fact, standardized test scores are so reliable and so consistent that they even allow colleges to track and compare student performance year after year, because a college can rely on the fact that a 27, for example, on the ACT in December 2018 or whatever, is roughly the same as a 27 on the ACT in February 2020, and so on. So keep that in mind. The key reason that standardized tests still exist is that they provide a numerical measurement that can be applied consistently across all applicants year after year after year. But here's the thing. If these tests provided that unchanging numerical reference point by just recycling the exact same questions every time the test was given, then that would actually defeat the purpose pretty quickly, because students would figure out what the questions were, and after a while, everybody would know all the right answers in advance before they even took the test. So the testing companies are in a weird position. They have to create a test that somehow measures the same thing every single time it's given year after year to over 1 million test takers each year, but they can't do that by just reusing the same questions, because then everybody would eventually know what the answers to those questions are, and the test would be useless. So the testing companies get around this by making sure that all real test questions follow a strict set of rules or standards. These standards cover all sorts of possible attributes of a test and its questions. So some of the standards are sort of obvious, like the fact that the ACT always has a section called the science section, and the SAT always has a section called the writing and language section. Some standards are a little less obvious, like the fact that the math sections of the SAT and the ACT never require you to know calculus in order to answer a question. And some of the standards are even less obvious than that. You get the idea. So there are tons of these kinds of standards for both the SAT and the ACT, again, ranging from super obvious things to not very obvious at all things. And these standards allow the tests to measure and reward the same underlying skill set over and over again without actually recycling the same questions word for word. Among other things, these hidden standards actually guarantee that the right answer to every single official test question is 100% predictable and consistent with all the other official test questions, even if it might not seem that way to a casual test taker. In fact, as it turns out, most test takers never do realize exactly how strict and consistent those standards are. At most, they might notice that the SAT and the ACT each seem to have like a consistent kind of feel, but they never really go beyond that. But a trained test taker knows that the easiest and most effective way to beat a standardized test is to learn the standards for the test and then exploit the weaknesses that are automatically built into those standards. So this is basically like knowing exactly what's going to be on the test. I mean, you can't know the precise wording or content of a question that will appear on test day, as we just said, but you can know precisely how each question on test day will be built. So you can know what kinds of relationships you'll see between a reading passage and the questions that ask about the passage. You can know what kinds of relationships you'll see among answer choices to each question. And you can know exactly which kinds of answer choices are rewarded and which kinds are punished. On the other hand, if you don't develop a sense of the test's standards, then you're stuck in an uncertain position of just kind of thinking the test is sort of hard and not really knowing what the questions are actually asking or how you should respond to them. And this is the standpoint from which most people take standardized tests. So there's only one way to make sure that you're giving yourself a chance to develop the right instincts in the first place about how the test is actually designed. And that is to practice with official test questions written by the company that makes the test. This is because practice questions written by other companies, including test prep companies, don't have to follow the same standards as the real test questions. The admissions process doesn't rely on fake tests written by third parties. It only relies on real tests written by the testing companies. So if a test from a third-party company isn't reliable, then there will never be any large-scale impact. Nobody will ever know. So we always recommend that you avoid any practice test written by a third-party company. Basically, if a practice test is not written by the same company that makes that test, then it's a fake practice test. Lots of companies do sell books and online courses based on fake practice tests, but those fake practice tests never adhere to all the standards that dictate what can appear on real practice tests. And this is also why we don't write practice questions for you to work with. We only tell you to use official test questions from the companies that make the test, and we only demonstrate our strategies against those official questions. And that way, you know for certain, all of the ideas we teach you in our black books and video courses will be 100% applicable and relevant on test day against the real test. You know that because you've seen them against question after question after question created by the companies that actually make the test. So I'm going to repeat this because it's super important. And for a lot of people, the first time they hear the idea, they're maybe not like totally sure that I actually mean what I'm saying. So I'm going to say it again. If you practice with real test questions from the company that makes the test, then you know that the underlying concepts in those questions and the patterns, relationships, and so on that you're exposed to are the same as what you will see on test day. On the other hand, if you practice with fake questions from any other company besides the company that makes the test, then there's no guarantee that what you're encountering in those fake questions will actually appear on test day. And in fact, we've seen lots of fake questions from major companies that included some details that definitely could never, ever, ever appear on a real test because they violate standards of that real test. And more than that, we've also seen that sometimes major companies fail to include details that will definitely appear on all real tests. So working with fake practice questions means there's a real chance that you'll develop habits and instincts that could actually hurt you on test day. And it also means that you'll miss out on the opportunity to develop the habits that would help you on test day. One very common example of this kind of thing is that fake questions sometimes reward you for interpreting a passage the way that you might interpret a text in a literature class. But the actual SAT and ACT never include questions where finding a right answer depends on literary interpretation. And there are many wrong answer types on both tests that specifically punish you for doing the kind of literary interpretation that would be encouraged and rewarded in most high school and college literature classes. Another example of this kind of thing is that fake questions sometimes require you to know math concepts that don't appear on real SAT or ACT math questions, or they might require you to know science ideas that couldn't appear on the actual ACT science section, or so on and so forth. So if you practice with questions like those, you're giving yourself a distorted view of what can actually appear on test day, and again, that interferes with your ability to prepare in the most effective and efficient way possible. So I strongly advise that you get your hands on some real practice questions as the first step of your training for a standardized test. You can find official practice questions for both the SAT and the ACT for free online, and you can also buy books with official practice tests from the companies that make those tests. We affectionately call the official College Board SAT book the Blue Book, and the official ACT book the Red Book, for reasons that are super obvious if you've ever seen one of those books, because one is mostly blue and the other one is mostly red. So having access to those real test questions is the only way to give yourself the chance to work out how real test questions actually function, so that on test day, you'll know the unwritten rules to follow and the weaknesses to exploit. And that's key if your goal is to get the highest score possible and avoid wasting your time. Of course, if you'd like somebody to spell out for you exactly what the important unwritten rules are for both the ACT and the SAT, so that you don't have to put your own time and energy into figuring that stuff out on your own, then I would humbly suggest that the second most important resource is either our video course or one of our black books. You see, our entire strategic approach to the SAT and the ACT is based on reverse engineering lots and lots of real official SAT and ACT test questions, and then teaching you only what you actually need to answer every single question confidently and correctly on test day. We show you what these tests actually reward and what they actually punish, which is often very different from what most people would expect. And that's why the vast majority of test takers, teachers, and parents think that the ACT and the SAT are much harder and much less fair than they really are once you know how they actually work. So for more on our books and video courses, head over to questprep.com or search for the ACT Prep Black Book or the SAT Prep Black Book on Amazon.com. Thanks.